I've never not been ready to fight about stuff. Let's go.
Welcome to the Basing Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Super.
And my name is still Liam Nolan.
Liam Nolan, welcome back. When we talked about zombies last episode, I thought that was going to be it, but then I realized that I hadn't really asked you about your stuff very much, and I realized this because as I started really thinking about your position, or at least what I interpreted to be your position, it quickly turned into some of the darkest existential horror I can imagine, and I thought I must be misunderstanding something. So I wanted to talk about that. Interrogate you on your stuff.
I don't know that I can... I'm not sure you will feel better after this, but I hope you will understand more of the position I was trying to lay out.
I guess I apologize to any of our listeners who are not into hearing more zombies and philosophy talk and want us to get back to AI or other things.
This ties into that eventually.
That's a good point, actually. And one of my later questions will get to that, in fact. I've only got the 3.
At some point, our AIs will be convincingly conscious. Then we'll need to decide, how we're going to tell if they are. So this is all relevant.
I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but since Stephen just brought it up, do you think that our AIs can become conscious at any point? Not LLMs necessarily, but some sort of silicon-based brains could become conscious, Liam?
So let me lay out one more time that, for the most part, as sort of requested last week, I'm conveying what I think is the position that Chalmers was trying to lay out with the zombie thing. And there might be a little bit of a gap between that and my intuitive guesses about what's going on. So if I get a little bit confused about that, I apologize in advance. I don't see any reason in principle that a thing made of silicon couldn't have qualia, but I also don't see any reason in principle that a thing made of silicon must have qualia. So that I think that's where I am. I know it's a little evasive.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer. We don't have any data points yet. I had this sort of epiphany, I don't know, in the last couple days that we had our Discord discussion after our last episode, where I think it fully clicked for me where Eneasz is coming from. And even if I understand that position, it's still not clear where the qualia comes in or exactly how. And so since the underlying mechanism for that isn't understood yet, it might have something to do with, electrochemical transmission rather than electrical. It might have something to do with the squishiness of neurons. So I am also agnostic about silicon-based consciousness.
It's hard to be sure. Do you mind if I ask, at the risk of derailing immediately, a thing I just can't help myself from doing, if you had the moment of realization, and I think you seemed to kind of get what I was getting at, do you mind if I ask you a quick question, just to see if you can convey it to me before we proceed?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. What I understand the basic premise to be, and I've sort of drilled down on this a little bit in some conversation that happened on the Discord. I think I poked at it a little bit in the published section. The basic premise is consciousness is the feeling of information being processed. And when you press on that, you can end somewhere that sounds a lot like, well, qualia is the feeling of information being processed. Or say sense perception is the sense perception of information being processed. And that feels to me like not only circular, but like just a point. It doesn't even really do a circle. A is the A of B feels to me like nothing. What am I missing?
I like this. Well, what's funny is I don't know what exactly happened, or maybe I don't know if I can switch my brain back or not, but my whole life I've been, the hard problem of consciousness is hard, and I haven't been able to understand exactly where Eneasz is coming from. Not just Eneasz, but the hard physical place is coming from. I'm like, why don't you guys see this? It's confusing. It just sort of crystallized that light hits my eyeball. The photoreceptive cells in there send signals down my optic nerve to my brain, which does some processing and brings that information before the consciousness part of me, right? That the qualia comes out of that mechanism. Where does that come from? It's one of the things that happens when that information is processed. That's just part of the processing. So your question was...
I guess my question was, the definition feels circular. Why doesn't it feel circular to you? But it sounds like you're not 100... You're sort of struggling to recapture that epiphany. And I'm sympathetic to that. I hate that feeling. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No. I like this spot. This uncertainty / did I just have a major update feeling is fun and exhilarating. So the circularness comes in the same way, and I'm bummed because this analogy came up somewhere else, and this was one that I thought of. But that like whatever force of nature that produces qualia would be akin to us discovering something like electromagnetism, where it's
Yeah,
like
that's Chalmers.
well, all right. Well, in my defense, I never read Chalmers.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I maybe read it in a discussion of his work somewhere, and so it probably wasn't an original me. But my thinking was like, when we understand this, it'll be like discovering a new force of nature or expanding an existing force to incorporate this thing that we now understand how it fits in there. So the circularness of it is a lot like asking, why does the north pole of a magnet rush towards the south pole of another magnet? At bottom, it's like just because, and that's a entirely unsatisfying answer, except for the fact that that's that bedrock of all of physics.
Well, I guess I'm worried now, because at the end there, when you were discussing how there was some additional fundamental rule, that sounds alarmingly like the thing I've been trying to present for the last 2 weeks. But you seem to be saying it as though it's the contraposition to that.
What's fun is I think that these positions might not actually be in disagreement. Maybe that'll be kind of where this goes, because I'm not actually sure where the disagreement comes in. Now that I think I've seen both sides of seen this from both sides of the fence. Let's press on and see if we find this. But yeah, don't let this point drop if we don't give you a satisfying answer.
This is so. I just want to lay out what I think you and Chalmers are defending. Please let me know if this is not correct. The physicalist position is that when you see something red and the cascades of activity happen in your brain across neurons, that's what it feels like to see something red. And you and Chalmers believe that for some reason that's not enough, that that doesn't produce consciousness, and therefore you can imagine a different universe where that exact same thing happens, but there's no consciousness because there needs to be some other field involved to actually have consciousness, right?
So I think you're like super close. I have to nitpick a tiny bit, because what I would say is not that, like, in this universe, in what appears to be reality, I would not try to say that when the light hits your eye and then the neurons fire, I would probably say that produces the qualia of red. What I would, however, also say is something like, well, it produces the qualia of red, but there must be some mechanism by which that happens. Just the existence of neurons firing doesn't appear to explain why that produces a qualia of red, but we can tell that the qualia of red is associated with when this thing happens. Is that a fair clarification to make?
Yes. That is why the two of you posit some other field, because you can't accept sounds insulting.
Yes, it does.
You disagree that atoms behaving in this way is what consciousness is, and that there must be something else instead that we aren't seeing that is producing the consciousness.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to actually explain it, even if I know that this is like a really crisp correlate for it. To give a light example, since I know you're circling back around to magnets, and I actually think magnets are like a really useful point of reference here.
At this point, we got diverted for almost 10 minutes on what to me feels like just a recapitulation of the previous episode. If you have heard the previous episode, I honestly don't think there's anything new in these 8 minutes, so I'm cutting them out so we can get to the heart of the matter. I will, however, add them to the end of the episode after the outro music in case anybody really wants to hear them to verify for yourself.
My Blink doorbell doesn't perceive my front porch, but it's aware of it.
Can I skip? I'm seriously considering skipping a lot of this because I feel all that we're doing is rehashing the last episode, which is very boring for me and for the listeners. I think it seems like we already covered all this, and I just wanted to define up front that you guys don't believe that what we see in the physical world is enough to explain consciousness. You think there's something else that we don't know about, right?
I think there's probably something else we don't know about, but I do think that it exists in reality.
Right. I don't know where else anything could exist, so I'm not going to argue with you that it doesn't exist in reality.
Great.
So the point of this conversation, hopefully, was for me to ask Liam about his model rather than Liam continuing to ask about our model and saying how it is not sufficient, because I'll grant you it is not 100% sufficient.
Okay.
I don't actually think we disagree.
Well, I think there is one point maybe where we disagree, and that's what I'm really interested in.
All right.
Real quick before we continue, Liam, since I know you often, you just like arguing. You're really good at it, and I love watching it. I listen to your podcast because of how fun it is to hear you argue, but I also know that sometimes you'll take positions that you don't necessarily believe in yourself just for the fun of arguing. I was curious how closely you personally think that Chalmers is on the right track here, and that you have the similar sentiment as he does.
I'm definitely a lot closer to Chalmers than I was before I started actually reading Chalmers' book. I don't know that I completely buy into his answer. I think he's provided a compelling reason to have doubts about like strict reductionist physicalism on the question of qualia. Whether I find his semi-dualist answer super compelling necessarily, I'm not sure. And the fact that I buy the zombies argument, I don't think necessarily suggests that I must accept that any version of dualism is necessarily true of this universe, although it could be true of another one. Yet it's messy. It's a very difficult question, and I have very few really good, strict A to B to C impenetrable answers for you, I'm afraid.
I apologize ahead of time for putting you in the position of arguing for something you may not necessarily agree with, and thank you for taking this hit and doing the best you can.
That's okay. I volunteered once I found out what your opinion was. Obviously, I had to take the other one.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's no game.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's fine. I'm not being coy. I 100% live for exactly this. It's great. Let's go.
Okay. What you said on the podcast, as you were defending Chalmers' position, field, you analogized to a magnetic field a lot. So we'll go ahead with field. I know in the podcast we called it juice, but that is a little, little childish, so maybe we shouldn't use the juice phrase, but let's call it a consciousness field, and that it's downstream of what we know of physics right now. Obviously, everything is very physical. It's related to how atoms or subatomic particles interact or whatever, but like it's the processing of physics in our real world that causes this field to happen somewhere.
I think maybe a cleaner way to consider it. I think the analogy to magnets is really helpful when considering the explanatory nature of the hard problem. In laying out what Chalmers is trying to say, I think he would disagree with the idea of a field, because a field implies a degree of like spatiality that implies a physicalness to what the consciousness thing must be. I think a better way of thinking about it is that Chalmers thinks consciousness is probably a product or maybe a result of, or there's some interaction that happens between particles and another thing that's kind of like space. And when you get the particles all together in the right ways, just like space warps and we get gravity, this other thing can warp and we get qualia. I think that's pretty easy to intuitively put into your mind, and I think that's what he's trying to get at. But I pray he never listens to this.
What word would you be okay with us using as an analogy for this? Juice doesn't sound quite right. You don't like field. Like, what can we call this space?
I think there's no harm done in using field, as long as we all understand that little tangent that I just went on and don't start getting bogged down in like specific field comparison. I think field is fine as vocab, but there is a distinction between that and space or time in terms of how we might think about it, if that's fair. I hope I'm not just being pedantic. I don't think I am, but it's hard to tell sometimes.
No, I don't think you are the least bit. No, I'm super on board with that.
My first interrogation, this doesn't get to my first question yet, so I don't want to call my first question. My first interrogation would be, is this field literally consciousness? Like, when atoms congregate and act in a certain way and cause this, fluctuations in this field or whatever, is that what you think consciousness is?
There are a couple of ways he talks about thinking about that in Conscious Mind. One answer is that, the thing that this field does is it is in some sense, or the field does consciousness, by which we mean, I won't use qualia, but like sense perception, the fact of experience. Another thing he thinks could maybe be going on, is very hard to tease apart, is perhaps it's not that there's a field that does consciousness, but there's a field which has in some sense a proto-conscious thing to it So this field isn't itself experience, but once it interacts with the locations of particles, just like time might interact with the location of particles, a consequence of the activity of this field might be experience. I'm not sure how to tease those apart experimentally, but I certainly think they're both coherent ideas of how we might get an explanation. I don't know which seems more likely. There's probably more philosophy about it that I haven't read.
What's fun is I could imagine the physicalist making almost exactly the same sentence, just from the other side. Like, we don't understand exactly what it does or how it works yet, but we will. And it's,
yeah.
I guess I didn't find anything about that or that explanation the least bit challenging.
I think Chalmers is actually like really amenable to physicalism in a way that is untrue of most versions of dualism, in that he does think there's one additional non-physical thing going on, but when he says non-physical thing, he doesn't mean like, well, there's a soul. He means that there's just this extra fact about the way of reality.
I'm going to come out on a limb here, not really a limb, and say that I disagree with Stephen, and I think this is basically just the Deepak Chopraing of consciousness and, using words like quantum to make it sound scientific when it's just mysticism.
Wait, are you saying that I'm the Deepak in this analogy, or that...
No, Chalmers is, and that this field is his quantumness. But that's the thing we're going to build towards, maybe? So when you actually think or feel something, that's not the atoms in your brain. That's something happening in this field, which is where the actual everything is.
I think not really. I think if you're in, well, both. When I have a feeling, the feeling is the result of the atoms in my brain somehow causing phenomenal experience.
And the phenomenal experience is that field.
And the phenomenal, or is the thing, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, it's some element of this additional fact, is it can cause that thing to happen. Yeah. But like saying it isn't the atoms in your brain doing it, it's like, well, they're doing it.
Right, yeah. They're agitating the field. The field wouldn't be agitated this way if it wasn't for the atoms, but the actual phenomenon of experiencing something is in the field, not in the atoms.
Yes.
I think the analogy to magnets is still super apropos here. The electromagnetic field isn't the little metal stick I'm holding. When I push it against another little metal stick and watching that stick move, the field itself is none of those things. But it comes from those things, right? So like it sounds wishy-washy and Chopra-y maybe, but it really isn't.
I'm not even attacking the field yet. I'm just establishing that the field is where the consciousness is. And that's why the zombie world hypothesis seems to have any weight behind it at all, because you can imagine a world where the atoms are still doing their things, but there's no field for it to interact with, and therefore there is no consciousness.
Yeah, I'm a little bit messy on the specifics of, is the field itself experience, or is experience a thing that the field does? Like once you get that step removed from stuff I can, I think the example I used last time was like stuff I can punch. I don't know the exact explanatory mechanism. I can see that I need an explanatory mechanism. So yeah, I'm willing to say that like the field, the atoms in your brain agitate the field, and then the field does experience via fieldiness, via something.
And that's why the zombies universe is compelling, because you can imagine a universe that still has the atoms doing things, but doesn't have a field for them to agitate.
Amongst other reasons, but I do think that's a very easy thing to consider, yeah. And it seems like all of behavior, I don't have a hard time explaining with atoms without ever appealing to experience. So, yeah.
Okay. Due to the fact that you can imagine the zombie world where everything goes exactly the same, but there's no consciousness, I believe this was stated directly by Chalmers or you, I don't remember which, this field does not change our physics. I believe the term used was it's a one-way force, that the atoms will agitate the field, but the field doesn't do anything back to the physical universe. Which is why the zombies can act exactly the same way, but not be conscious, because the field doesn't have any effect back.
If you really needed to, I think you could, well, any mechanism by which we're like imparting new forces into atoms gets tough, right? So probably, yeah, the version of this that seems to make sense is that the atoms are agitating, et cetera, this field. This field doesn't appear to be a field of which we have yet identified. So I could pick at this, but I think I can give it to you and move on. If you don't like, just declare victory and run away right now.
No.
Does the electromagnetic field cause like the metal stick in my hand to do something in the same way that? Oh, how did you put it, Eneasz?
A one-way force?
Yeah, like the electromagnetic force.
I mean, we can see what it does. It pushes metal bits around, so it is not a one-way force.
Right.
It has effects on
It's not one
atoms.
way, but it maybe that is the difference.
I do really like the magnet analogy for building intuition about what it might mean for something to have a really confusing, apparently extra physical force. Because, like, there's no magnet particle, but I don't think it's perfect. Because magnets do seem to be easier to interact with. I can access a magnetic field in a way easier way than I can access the qualia inside of, like, a fox's brain.
Yeah, I think maybe I did find the edge of the analogy there, even if I am tempted just to keep digging at it.
Okay, so if in fact there is this field of consciousness, and that is where consciousness resides or results from, and you can remove this field, therefore removing consciousness from the universe, but the universe is completely unchanged and keeps going, which is why the zombie hypothesis is compelling, then that means the field creates consciousness but doesn't affect anything physical. Chalmers, from what I read of him, actually literally said that the zombie world is identical in every single way, down to the movement of atoms. It just doesn't have consciousness. The horrifying thing to me is that sounds like if the consciousness field doesn't have any effects on the universe, then we're trapped, unable to affect anything ever. All we're doing is observing what our meat suits are doing with their atoms bouncing around, and everything that we do and say is determined by the laws of physics and atoms bouncing around. And since these atoms also perturb the consciousness field, we can experience it, and that's great, but we can't affect the atoms back, and so we're like the guy in Get Out that's just stuck inside a body watching it doing things.
Yeah.
What is the we in this position, Eneasz?
The we is the conscious entity that is experiencing things.
So do you think that you, whatever you is, can change the world with notions that come from your brain, from physical laws, that in a way that isn't determined by those physical laws?
Yeah, I'm genuinely confused. I did not think you believed in free will.
I believe that we can make decisions.
Yeah, me too. I make decisions all the time.
Right.
But they're determined.
Right.
Yeah. They're within certain bounds of reason. Yes, they're determined, but we could have made other decisions in theory.
So,
oh no, this is going to be a free will debate. Oh no!
Well, if this is also ripe fruit to pick at it, and I think it's one we've been meaning to get to for a long time. If it does go there, I was confused by the last bit you were saying there, Eneasz, too, because it sounds like you were saying, well, you're saying free will isn't true, and it's like, yeah.
I came to terms with that when I was like 12.
It took me into my 20s.
I still think free will exists in the way that matters, in that the algorithm that makes the decisions is me.
I agree, but how is that not how is that?
Aren't you still trapped in the meat suit with the algorithm doing all the things it was always going to do and never could have done otherwise?
No, because I am the algorithm. I am the meat suit.
That's true in both these universes, in both the zombie universe and the not zombie universe.
In the consciousness field universe, the consciousness field just goes there experiencing things, and it can't affect anything because it can't affect physical particles in the real world.
What part of you is affecting physical parts of the real world?
The part of me that's my brain?
Right.
That sends
but that's like the higher level of, like, yes, your brain moves your fingers, right? But like your brain would move your fingers whether or not you were conscious or whether or not you had free will.
Are we all on board that we are our brains?
Yes.
Okay. Then I don't see where the objection is to the fact that my brain affects things in the world.
Well, you were saying that...
Who is I?
You had said that, like, that was a different position than what... Sorry, you laid that out like it was like a scary implication of the zombie Chalmerism, viewpoint.
It's a terrifying implication, because the I in the zombie Chalmers viewpoint is this consciousness field which cannot affect particles.
And what is the I in your version? Your brain?
It is my brain, yeah.
But your brain...
Which is made up of particles.
But yeah, your brain is made up of particles. It responds to particles. particle
Yeah, that's
particle.
the beauty of it.
So you believe
that's true in the Chalmers version too. Liam, I think you can help me center this.
Right,
but
but in the Chalmers version, the brain doesn't have any experiences. It doesn't have any consciousness. All the consciousness is off in this field, in the non-physical parts, or the non-atom parts anyway.
I mean this genuinely. I'm not doing a debate bit.
Okay.
I don't understand the practical distinction between you, a brain, being locked into a series of actions and experiences of which you can never change or influence because they always are going to be what they always were going to be, and you, an experiencer, tied directly to the physical state of a brain being locked into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, genuinely, I'm not understanding why one of these bothers you and the other one doesn't.
I don't think that my brain is completely locked in. Like, I am my brain. I am the decision-making algorithm here. So as long as the decision-making algorithm is making decisions, then I'm affecting the universe, and I'm happy about that.
what part of that falls apart if under the zombie view?
Under the zombie view, the decision-making algorithm is still in your brain, which is a physical object in the physical world, and the actual you that experiences things cannot affect the brain, and therefore is not part of the decision-making algorithm. In the zombie world, the consciousness can't affect particles.
Yeah, it matters only because in the non-zombie world, you're still locked into suffering no matter what, but at least you're in some sense an active participant. Like, you can maintain that, I would argue, illusion that you're in some sense making choices. Like, we haven't put you in the MRI as a grad student yet, and we haven't caught on that the choice had already been made before you felt it. And if you don't care about experience as an important differentiator of personhood, then if you were in the zombies universe, well, but you'll still get the cool sensation of having made all the choices. So, like,
Right. I mean, to me,
Which is all you have now anyway.
To me, the horrific part isn't even making choices, because to me, that's not that big a deal. Due to what my values are, the big deal to me is being able to connect to other humans. That is what is extremely valuable in my value system anyway. And in the Chalmers universe, we can't, because we're these isolated things in this consciousness field, and there's no way we can communicate with anyone else, because it's just the atoms down there communicating by using sound vibrations through the air, which is made of atoms, or sending texts to each other, which is made of photons that were transmitted due to electrons going through wires, which are made of atoms. Like, any kind of communication with any other being is mediated through atoms, and we're entirely alone and can never, ever talk with any other consciousness if we're trapped in this consciousness field, which cannot affect atoms.
yeah.
And that is the most horrifying, alienating thing I can imagine.
No, for sure. We're brains and vats, 100%.
I don't want to horrify you, Eneasz, but I think you're describing our universe.
Yeah.
No, in my universe, I can get on the phone or on this program and talk with you and Liam.
But we're doing that here, yes.
Yeah, that's why our universe is great, and the universe where there's a separate consciousness field where our consciousness is isolated from atoms is horrifying.
It sounds like you're describing that you have that, though, in this universe. Like, it sounds like you're saying, no, me as the instantiation experiencing algorithm, I am this thing that can impact the universe.
Yeah, in our physical world.
It sounds like you're positing that. It sounds like you're making the Chalmers argument.
It does.
Is not the Chalmers argument that the consciousness is in the consciousness field?
Chalmers aside, now let's try and talk about like what's actually going on. And Chalmers might be on the point there or not, but since I don't know his position, I'm not going to try and articulate it. I'm going to just drill on this. Like, the fact of the matter is like, we are in a circumstance where we are the subjects of experience of the folding out of the universe, right?
Yeah, but we can talk to each other.
I don't see how that's a point against.
Yeah, I'm doing that now in a fully deterministic universe where the sentence that I said was already determined before I began to say it.
I mean, I'm not here to fight determinism, but I am happy that we can talk to each other in this universe. And we couldn't, if you believe in the separate consciousness field, these meat suits would still be talking to each other because the particles are moving the same way. And we'd even reply to each other the same way because apparently, I don't know, we're some weird clockwork automata without consciousness. And all the real consciousness is somewhere that can't talk to each other because they can't affect each other at all.
This feels super, incredibly intuitive to me. I'm not even sure where to begin piecing apart how to convey this one. I'm sorry.
Wait, so you just accept that our consciousnesses are prisoners watching meat suits and can't talk to each other?
I mean, yeah. Like, before I even started thinking about this stuff, I think that was a thing that I had.
And I would push back on the prisoners and like the Get Out analogy, because in that there's like this entity inside the inside the algorithm, inside the machine, banging its head on the wall and aware of everything but unable to do anything about it. There is no version of that in either of these universes.
Well,
so in the consciousness field, they're just completely ignorant.
hang on. I'll defend your analogy here. I have had in the past some pretty spectacular mental health problems, and guy on the inside banging on the walls and unable to do anything about it is like, that feels super fine also. 100%, yeah. Have you never watched yourself make a decision and you knew it was the wrong one, but you just couldn't change it?
Oh, that's the subtitle of my autobiography.
Well, there you go. I knew this was universal.
Right. I don't think that's the same circumstance, though, as like this. What am I trying to say? I mean, that's the case that we're in, and we're not in the zombie universe.
For what it's worth, I've not had that experience myself, so maybe this is where we're disconnecting.
You've never knowingly done something stupid?
Oh, I've knowingly done things that are stupid, but I did them on purpose.
Man, all the time. Like, yesterday, I'm boiling water, and I realize, like, I've got a gas stove, and I realize that if I swing the ladle fast enough, I can make the flames go whoosh.
Okay.
And I'm doing that because I like the sound.
Yeah.
And then I keep hitting the pot handle, and I'm thinking, man, Steven, I need to stop doing this because I'm going to knock this pot of boiling water over, and I'm going to, make a mess or hurt myself. And I keep doing it. And then I did stop before I, had a scalding accident. But
it sounds like your risk tolerance was very well calibrated then. You had a lot of fun hearing the whoosh noise and you didn't get boiled.
But even after the point where I was like, I should stop, I kept doing it for a little while longer.
It was exciting to try to press your luck. Like, you knew you were doing something stupid, though. You weren't, like, trying to stop your body from doing the thing and unable to do so.
I almost was. That actually, like, that is the closest I can get now to, like, the me in the bottom of the well and Get Out. Like, the rational part of my brain, the super ego, the whatever you want to call it, was saying, dude, knock this off. It doesn't matter how much fun the noise is. But it took the part of my brain that pilots my body a few more swings. Like, I'd hit the handle a few more times before I finally stopped. Right?
That is so weird.
Man, maybe Eneasz is the only sane one here who doesn't do stupid things.
Oh no, I do stupid things. I do self-destructive things, but like, I'm not like trying to stop the body that I'm in from doing them and finding myself trapped.
Well, if you think on this hard enough, perhaps you'll be able to experience, like, crushing claustrophobia.
What? Why would I want to do that?
To be right. Aren't we rationalists?
Wait, why do you want me to feel claustrophobia again? What would make me right?
Well, I think it's the case that I am a bundle of qualia trapped and alone. You want to be correct?
I think I'm correct, and therefore I will not delude myself into feeling claustrophobic.
Wait,
like
so
that.
You're more than just a bundle of qualia.
I think that the Chalmers qualia field is incoherent, and that I am a physical being.
I mean, I think I'm a physical being too, but I think that, if anything, the physical being is more trapped than the Chalmers being.
Why?
Because the Chalmers being has this extra, not to be pejorative, magic field on top of it.
Yeah.
That gets all this, like,
but
the actual freedom that you're talking about.
No, the magic field has no freedom. It's the ultimate prison because it can't affect even the smallest particle.
Yeah, and worse, it's like clearly incredibly fragile. It might go away if you nap too hard. We're not sure. This isn't reassuring.
This is awesome.
I didn't expect you to bite the bullet, I guess. That line of questioning has been completed.
Eneasz, I think you're ducking the bullet, man.
What? What am I ducking?
The bullet being that, like, we are in our current universe, not in any hypothetical one, the perceivers of a deterministic reality that's unfolding.
Oh,
we affect things the same way that water flowing downhill affects things. Like,
yeah, I just disagree on that. I think that we can and do change things in the world.
I mean, depending on how you're using, like, we can change things. Basically, depending on how you're using every word in that sentence, I have to agree with you because, like, right now I can pick this thing up on my desk and put it in a different spot. I just did.
Yeah.
I've changed the world.
Look, I'm happy to say that my decision algorithm has been massively influenced by all sorts of things that were outside the control of the decision algorithm, and yet it is not entirely without self-control. I have been able to modify it over the years a bit.
But that was only possible because it always was going to happen. Like, I'm not saying effort isn't important, and clearly self-discipline is, like, key, and just thinking about this isn't going to lead to a very good life. But it's also inevitable in a way, right?
No.
All right. What's the next question?
The next question was, I think that this was actually a quick point that I wanted to make before we went on to the next question. Mm-hmm. That is, I think, what Eliezer was saying that we had never quite gotten onto. The zombie Chalmers writes the exact same paper that Field Chalmers writes for the same reasons, because in Chalmers' argument, Field Chalmers still does things because of the interaction of particles in the brain. There's just a consciousness field to experience it there. He said, why would you, this is my ultimate question, why even posit this consciousness field when it doesn't do anything at all? Like, it doesn't affect particles. It gives you maybe horror nightmare fuel, and then nothing is different in any way that anyone can tell.
I can't tell, so please don't take this the wrong way. But is this a real question, or are you, like, messing with me?
No, this is a real question. Like, if we do all the same stuff, and we can't even tell the difference between being conscious or not conscious, why posit this field at all that does nothing?
Okay. So, I don't know. There's a couple of things that I guess I could poke at here. One is, it doesn't seem... I know it seems to you, but it doesn't seem to me that crazy that something like a zombie would end up writing papers about a thing that sounds like consciousness. We seem to have LLMs, so, like, just word processing doesn't demand consciousness. And maybe it's just a weird thing about the way that verbal information transmission works that you end up there. I don't know, could be. Not key to the point. But two, I'm sort of 100% with you that if I was an observer of a universe, I would have absolutely no reason to ever consider, think about, take seriously. I wouldn't even posit the possibility of such a thing as experience or a field that needs to explain how we get experience from locations of particles, because everything in the universe, with the exception of experience, appears very explicable without positing the field. Unfortunately, I do appear to have an experience, and since I think that experience is occurring in reality, I think that experience is a feature of reality, and I would posit the field to explain it in the same way that I posit atoms to explain molecules or magnetic fields to explain why my fridge works.
Okay. I guess you'd have to assert that there is no consciousness without the field then.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Because the field is... The thing the field is being posited to do is explain the consciousness. So,
but there's... It seems the field is there entirely to make... I don't know, to scratch some itch of Chalmers and other dualists. Like, the field literally doesn't do anything. There's no way to, like, investigate it. There's no evidence for its existence. It's like, well, I don't understand why Chalmers posited, like, a field as opposed to any other sort of magic he could have, aside from maybe it sounds scientific, and that's why I consider him Chopra-like. He just latched onto a scientific-sounding word and said, oh, this is the explanation, for no particular reason. Like, there's nothing that would point you in the direction of thinking this sort of field exists.
Well, yeah, there is. And it's if you were trying to explain why qualia can happen.
Yeah, but you can make up anything if you're making stuff up. Like, why would you make up a field as opposed to, like, a spirit that resides inside a being that has been infused with spirits by whatever process you care to name?
Well, because one is less ridiculous than the other.
No, they're equally ridiculous. One uses science words.
Well, so my position from where I landed in the physicalist camp is that this will be explained in some scientific sounding terms at some point. We just don't have the words yet. I think that the Chopra would say, no, it's forever beyond explanation. It's magic. Like it is, beyond our understanding in principle kind of thing. Right.
I think Chopra just says it's quantum.
Well, we already agreed we're going to use the word field here with the big asterisk next to it. Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, we could have chosen the syllable. We could have chosen the phonemes that make the sound quantum, right? But we didn't. We used field instead. But with the understanding that we're not talking about a field like we're talking about other fields. So yes, Chopra is doing it wrong. I think he's not actually trying to dig into something there's an important difference between the kinds of
I agree
mental shenanigans Chopra gets up to than whatever Chalmers is doing. Even if I disagreed with him, he is doing it in a much more respectable way than anything Chopra is doing.
So what the accusation that he's just using science words, I think any attempt to explain a feature of reality, like any genuine attempt to explain a feature of reality, is probably going to end up using words that sound science-y. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Inescapably fair.
Yeah, but usually you don't do the invisible dragon in my garage thing where it turns out there's absolutely no way to interrogate these. It's just posited as this has to be the answer to this problem I made up.
I don't know. There's a lot of things I'm not sure about in that last sentence. First, the thing about the invisible dragon. Let's think about dragons for a second. Maybe one of the core characteristics of dragons is that they are big. We know dragons fly. We know that they eat knights. They do dragon stuff.
They breathe fire. Breathing fire is important.
Breathing fire, of course. All the dragon stuff. This set of dragon things doesn't include impermeability, specifically to flour. It doesn't include invisibility. It doesn't include living in some guy's garage. These are all like additional facets of explanation that we needed to build to justify why there could be a dragon, which we associate with a completely different set of characteristics. Whereas if we're talking about qualia, taking qualia on its face, unlike the dragon, which has a bunch of easy to interrogate physical characteristics, qualia appears to be not accessible from the outside. It seems prima facie like qualia can probably only be experienced by the person experiencing the qualia. If you have a reason to think otherwise, please let me know. I would love to be in a PhD program. It also seems like qualia doesn't necessarily impact stuff in the world. We're coming up with better and better purely physical explanations for how stuff happens. Animals look like they have qualia, but a lot of the stuff they do is explicable just by having complicated brains. Plants track the sun. Do they have qualia? Well, I don't know. So taking qualia on its face, we get a much harder problem to address than taking dragons on their face. And so positing more complicated answers to this question seems completely legitimate in a way that, well, the dragon must be impermeable to flour, does not. So when I say, well, the qualia appears to not be accessible from the outside, I'm not explaining away something that was challenging for me to talk about in qualia. That was already there, right? Does this make sense at all?
Sort of. Yes, I see what you're saying. But also the fact that you posit a universe that is identical to our universe but has no qualia means that you cannot verify that this thing exists in any way that involves the physical universe.
Can you?
Can I what?
Can you verify that it exists?
You mean qualia, consciousness?
Yes.
Welcome back. I was editing and I found a spot where I was deeply annoyed at myself for getting sidetracked. So I wanted to loop back to it real quick since you were very amenable to coming back on and being really kind about these things.
No problem. What is it?
In the original podcast, I said that Chalmers is positing a universe that is physically identical to ours in every way except without his consciousness field. That means that it is, in principle, impossible to verify the field's existence or interrogate it, do science to it. It's literally posited to be undisprovable. I use the words, because you posit a universe that is identical to ours but has no qualia, means you cannot verify this thing exists. By this thing, I meant Chalmers' consciousness field. But you immediately said, asked if I could verify that exists. And that really confused me because, like, my whole contention in this whole podcast is that no, the consciousness field doesn't exist. How could I possibly verify something that I think doesn't exist exists? I like stumbled for a bit and I said, "What do you mean consciousness?" Because like that's the closest I could imagine to what you meant by can you verify it exists. And then we went off on that for a little while, like verifying whether consciousness exists or not. But we never came back to that. And so now I want to correct that and return to the question. This is the question that I think Eliezer asks and that I asked, like, why posit this field? If its existence is literally impossible to verify, then it seems really damn suspicious that Chalmers has posited a field that he's also explicitly said is untestable in any way. You do not think it is suspicious that he has done that he may have some reason for that?
So I see how the misunderstanding part happened, because even as you were setting that up, right when you got to the end, before you described the way that I took the question in an unintended direction, I was sitting here and thinking to myself, but I have evidence that the thing which it explains exists because I'm currently doing it right now. What do you mean? How could I not have evidence of it? I'm doing it. It's
yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Experience exists,
so yeah,
just not the Chalmers field.
I see how that may have happened. Why would I posit a thing which doesn't seem as though it can be? I think I want to dig a little bit at what I might consider to be evidence of things. So there is a model of evidence where I have evidence because I have performed physical experimentation. I picked up a weight and I put it on a scale with another weight. So I've performed a physical experiment, and that experiment is both itself evidence and provides evidence for maybe a theory that says these two things weigh the same. We see what I'm getting at there.
Yes.
There might be another way that we could have evidence of things, and that way might be through application of reason. Chalmers might say, and many philosophers might say, that while we can definitely get evidence of things from experimentation by punching it, to continue a metaphor that I should have thought about harder before committing so hard, we might also get evidence of things by applying logic to things. There's a lot of things that we seem to have evidence of only through the application of logic. I think a lot of math ends up being this. I know that there are branches of physics which were evidenced by the logic before they were evidenced by the experiment. So I think implicitly what you're doing when you set up this question is you're saying the only model of evidence that I'm willing to accept exists as evidence is when I perform a scale-like experiment. And I'm not sure that I agree that that's true. I think we can also have evidence of things based on the application of reason, and in applying reason to the best of our ability to what I'm going to say is like the scale, which is the fact of experience. There's clearly something to explain. I have evidence that there's a thing to explain. I think something I may or may not have said on the air was that I would definitely never agree that qualia exists if I didn't have it. Like, it'd be dumb. It would be completely absurd to come to that conclusion. So I have evidence that there's something there to explain, and therefore I'm not that bothered that when I'm trying to explain it, I'm positing things through the application of reason that I can't necessarily punch. Although I agree, if I could punch it, it would be better.
I think it's weird that you would not believe that experience exists unless you personally experienced it yourself. I do remember you saying in the episode somewhere that an outside observer could look at our universe and have absolutely no reason to ever posit anything like experience or consciousness happening. That seems absurd to me because there's entities within this universe who talk a lot about experiencing things and having consciousness. And if nothing else, that's some level of evidence that they're talking about something that they feel, right?
Yeah, but it's not very good evidence. So to take this framework, we're outside observers just looking at the universe. If I was to start noticing that these little clumps of atoms were communicating in a way that I've learned to decipher, and they start talking about having experience, for similar reasons to why I don't take LLMs very seriously when they start doing that, I would be way more likely to posit that, oh, this is just some cool quirk of what happens when you run vocabulary-style information encoding systems long enough, is they start to develop this weird reflectivity thing that exists inside of the language. I wonder what that's about. Because none of the other behavior Like, let's say we cut humans, we just have cats. None of the cat behaviors do I need to posit qualia for. I can just look at what's happening. They're just doing analog processing with some neurons. And like, I would never come to the conclusion that there's an experience associated with that, because why would I?
All right. Okay. Let's shelve all that because you're right. There's a lot to dig into and much more than the 5 minutes. Shit, we're already way over that.
Can you verify that it exists?
You mean qualia, consciousness?
Yes.
This is the fun, hard problem. This is the thing. You can verify it for you, but if you can verify it for me, I'd be damned interested to learn how.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I wanted to actually verify qualia, I think I would want something like being able to actually see the neural activity. That would be more important to me than just talking to someone. Like, the talking to someone is a nice shorthand for people who are out in the world without fMRI machines.
I think you can get physical activity or detectable activity in an MRI.
Yeah, without consciousness. Like, that's one of the interesting things, right?
Right.
Like, what is it? What is the threshold that needs to be crossed? And what is it specifically? What patterns that correspond to actual consciousness?
Right. Well, so you just said, like, all right, talking is a good shorthand because I don't have an fMRI. But even if I did, It's not enough either.
I mean, I think it would be enough once we know enough about it. There's people working on it right now.
But you're
for
convinced.
all I know, the state of the art may be already there. I'm not that well read up on it. I'm certainly not in any research labs.
Right, but you're absolutely positive that there's no new fact about reality we need to learn to explain it.
Yes.
All right, I'm no longer in the physicalist camp, I guess. There's something new we need to understand because we don't have an explanation. Like, we're right now we're in the circumstance of this stick moves this stick, and I don't know why. It's magnets, but I don't know how they work. And in order for me to get satisfied with that, I'll need to understand electromagnetism. We need that equivalent to explain consciousness.
Allow me to clarify. By new thing, I mean a new property of matter, new law of physics. I don't think we need a new one of those. We do need new theories, new paradigms for how neural networks and possibly other information processing activation networks work to explain it. But I don't think we need new physics. No.
Okay, I'm going to not interrogate why information processing is so obvious the answer here, but
okay.
I need you to understand the force of will involved in moving past this.
All right.
So,
well,
let's say I come to you and I say, hey, inside this binder, and I'm not lying, is proof we found it. There is a additional feature of reality. It doesn't interact with particles, but like space or time, it's just this thing about reality. Science clicked their heels 3 times and spun sideways, and then bam, they found it. They got it.
Yeah.
Is that so? Now we have Chalmers mystery field. Is that physics?
I would assume so. Yeah. And if you came to me with that binder, and again, as you posited, you're not lying, then I would believe you, obviously, because I ain't no physicist. I don't know the state of the art on physics. I just don't think that's necessary.
No, I'm asking literally, would a non-physical thing be physics?
No.
So would the field be physics?
I think the field would be physics, yeah. Just a physics that is, as you said, an entirely one-way field.
Okay.
Physics interacts with it, but it doesn't interact back.
Okay.
Which is horrifying, in my opinion, but I guess not everybody's.
I mean, I'm not thrilled with it. I'm just kind of living with that at this point.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. That's why I wrestled with it. I wasn't as strong a 12-year-old as you were. Like I said, it took me at least twice as long to finally decide, okay, yeah, that's where we're at. And then shortly thereafter becoming okay with that.
So
I found the secret, if you're a listener and you've been bothered by this, is just lean really hard into the learned helplessness.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. Listeners, don't do this.
You just got to get over the hump. And then once you're past that hill of sadness, you kind of just numb out and it's fine.
I feel like Liam turned into the ultimate Buddhist. He has found enlightenment.
I think that there's another way, and it's explained somewhat satisfactorily in Sam Harris's book called Free Will. It does sort of, if you look at it through the right lens, kind of just sound a lot like the learned helplessness thing, but it preserves all the things we care about.
I'll read the book. Maybe it's good.
Oh, if you haven't read it, I think you'd like it. And it's certainly, I think, valuable to anyone who's ever struggled with the question of what is free will? Am I, what does it mean to make a decision kind of stuff. I found it really enlightening there.
So I was wondering, maybe have you thought about this, or did you read in Chalmers, has he said anything about this? Like, why is it that a normally functioning human brain will perturb the consciousness field, but a brain that is under anesthetic won't? Or someone who's like deeply sleeping and not in a dream state?
I'm not sure. It seems odd. To be fair, though, I'm not as curious about that, but I think I have a little bit of a unintuitive take on like what anesthetic or being asleep is like. So I'm pretty confident that going to sleep is more about not storing memory than it is about not experiencing.
I love it. That's so cool. So you're basically blackout drunk when you're asleep.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think is happening. And similarly, and this is why I genuinely am very concerned if I'll ever need surgery. I don't know if that's true for anesthetics. I know they do have a lot of drugs in there that are just paralytic and like memory formation reducing, because sometimes people wake up and you don't want them moving or remembering that. It seems like they won't just give you those if you ask. And like, yeah, it's maybe the one that makes you unconscious puts you close enough to dead that the field stops working. Maybe it doesn't.
I've had the same concern, and this is some of the exciting and horrifying fruit born of fun thought experiments, but I've never been generally anesthetized. And for all I know, I'm a fully experiencing person, but I just forget it all. And then the fact that people get surgeries all the time and, seem fine afterwards seems to suggest that like any Groundhog Day situation or any time loop, if you read Worth the Candle or saw Groundhog Day, because the day resets, then nothing wrong happened. So because I forgot how much it hurt during the surgery because all the drugs did their job correctly, then nothing wrong happened. That's kind of how I think about it.
That seems fine.
I also haven't had, like I said, fully anesthetized surgery. So
I think I would be a lot more comfortable if they just gave me the memory inhibitors and the paralytics. Not the me that's experiencing that, but like that guy only matters for an hour, right?
Exactly. He's only alive for that time, and then he's not around to complain anymore. So,
or at least I don't have to deal with the fallout. But there's a continuity that still exists. Whereas like with general anesthesia, even though people wake up and are fine, just like I think teleporters are possible, but I think that's a different person.
That's a different silly argument for a different day.
I don't know if it's a silly argument or if it's, or I mean, we might have time for it today.
It always brings people to silly places is the thing.
This is clearly a tangent. I think it's related to the anesthesia thing directly, but we're off on a...
Yeah, it's related to the anesthesia thing, but the anesthesia thing is only tangential to what we're talking about. But for whatever it's worth, I don't think it's a silly argument. I don't think it would take us to a silly place because Liam's a serious person.
That's a good point. All right, we could actually possibly talk about the teleporting thing, but before we do, I want to hit this. So there's possibly no state for a living human brain to not be experiencing things.
I don't know. Unclear. I'm not sure what parts of the brain are the important parts for making qualia happen. I can make some guesses about neural structures that seem correlated with qualia. I know if we take out the right area in your brain, you'll lose this, that, or the other thing. But yeah. I'm not good enough at philosophy or neurobiology to pretend I can sit here and be like, yeah, it's fine until then. And then the field that's already kind of hard to understand goes away. I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't.
I'm assuming that at birth, a human has conscious experience in qualia, right?
Maybe.
Oh, wait. You think it's possible that newborn infants don't have experience?
Yeah, for sure. Don't you?
This was something I actually wanted to bring back up because you mentioned this in a similar vein last episode about some animals might not be having experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So they're more akin to my doorbell than they are to me.
Yeah.
What is the thing that makes a difference that causes the consciousness field to perturb enough to have consciousness that it isn't happening in a baby, but it is happening in an adult?
I'm not basing my babies might not be conscious thing on the field. I'm basing it on having seen babies. They just seem more like plants than like people.
What is the difference in what's happening in their neurons, though, that it doesn't perturb the field?
If the field works the way I think the field works, then everything should perturb the field. But if it perturbs it in such a way as to experience as qualia feels like a different question. And probably pretty early on after birth, you should expect them to start having experience. But I just don't have any good sense of where to draw this line from, like, children who I'm pretty sure it really seems like they must have experience. Like, I'm making crazy assumptions and telling wild, complicated stories to make 5-year-olds not have qualia. I think I tell much less complicated stories to make a 1-minute-old not have qualia. And then I think I tell even easier stories than that to make, like, a cockroach not have qualia. So there's sort of
what's the difference between, like, a 5-year-old brain and an infant brain, though, that one of them perturbs the field the right way that the other doesn't?
One of them just seems to work a lot better. I don't think that's necessarily directly correlated to field stuff. It just seems to be more functional.
No, sure, functional, absolutely. But consciousness is in the field. The field is what causes consciousness.
Correct.
So the baby brain is not perturbing it correctly to cause consciousness.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe, could be. I suspect yes, because I have seen babies. But, like,
right.
If you're getting at a principled where's the line on the field, I couldn't even begin.
No, I don't care, like, where the line is. I'm happy to say at birth, no consciousness, at 5-year-old, conscious. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in the middle it happens. What is changing that starts making the field be perturbed? Because it's obviously not the neurons. Is it the connections between the neurons? Is it how the neurons activate?
Don't the neurons in a baby's brain actually change, like, a crazy amount in the first, like, 6 to 12 months?
I believe they do. And yeah, I think, in fact, that there's, like, a major culling of neurons that you have significantly less after a while because the connections that matter are strengthened and the vast majority of connections that don't matter die away.
Oh, maybe that's related? I don't know.
I mean,
I apologize. I have no strong principled philosophical argument on this one. You're right. It's really hard to tell where we should draw that line or what parts might be important. The only thing we can really be confident of, the only thing we can know is our own. We can be pretty confident other adult human brains through, like, analogy probably also have qualia. But the farther away we get from that, the more tenuous I feel like it is.
Liam.
It's not accessible. Yeah.
Liam, if the major difference between a newborn brain and a 5-year-old brain is the structure of the neurons, doesn't that imply that something about the neurons is activating the field here?
Sure. Something
that the neurons are doing?
Yeah, but I said that an hour ago.
Okay. Why do you need the field?
To the explaining. It's the explaining part.
What are you explaining? The neurons, you've just said, is what creates the consciousness. The correct ordering of the neurons rather than just having a mass of interconnected, not correlated to anything in the universe neurons.
Qualia. Hey, maybe babies are double conscious.
But that is not what you believe.
No, but if you heard a change in tone where I got a lot less confident, a lot more wishy-washy on the baby thing, that was maybe a clue that, like, I'm not deeply committed to any particular baby position. Yeah, you have me, I guess.
I kind of wonder what neurons do, because as far as I can tell, the main thing neurons do is process information.
Yeah, it's really weird that neurons seem to do that. And that, like, switches don't. It's baffling.
Really weird, or literally the reason behind all of this?
Both. Like,
I don't want to give you the second one. We have one example of a thing. It processes information, so naturally that's the only underlying connect. I don't know.
Well, I think you also said that you aren't necessarily married to neurons, that, like, if the neurons in your brain were slowly replaced by carbon nanotubes and, I don't know, the LK99 superconductor element in some funky way that made them do the same thing the neurons are doing, then you're still thinking the same, you can't feel any difference, then you'd still be conscious, right? It's still perturbing the field.
Well, Liam said that about Liam's opinion, which is much less field-y. I think my natural intuitions about consciousness is that it's something which exists more in the way math might exist. I don't want to use the word emergent. Whereas with the field, like, yeah, most stuff probably should interfere with the field. It appears to be downstream of physical reality. I don't want to go all, when you think everything is some degree of conscious.
Panpsychism.
Panpsychist?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not trying to do that on you, although it's maybe a natural understanding of what might be going on if there was a thing like space but for qualia. It's tough. I don't. It's hard. It's a hard problem, even with Chalmers' proposed solution. Still hard.
It seems to me that, like, if you can replace the neurons with carbon nanotube devices and still have consciousness, it's the actual physical matter doesn't matter as much as what they are doing.
Yeah, and hopefully those would also perturb the field. But it's really hard to say if it would perturb the field, because it's very difficult to interact with the field, except via experience.
Okay. If a carbon nanotube brain could have experience, I'm assuming that, like, a silicon brain could too. Like, we could possibly create AIs that have experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't. Now, when I say that, I think there's a lot of problems with how would we know? But, like, in concept, I don't think there's anything, like, magical about specifically human brains in the universe. That's certainly not what I've been trying to say this whole time.
Well, since that's mainly when you boil down to its charges changing on chips in a certain lawful way that processes information, I again seem to return back to the thing that perturbs the consciousness field is information processing.
It could be. Maybe it's some other thing. Maybe it really cares about calcium.
Sure, possibly. It doesn't sound like you think that's terribly likely, since you are on board with cybernetic brains and possibly software being conscious.
Yeah, and I think Chalmers probably is on board with both of those too, although not necessarily any cybernetic brain or any software being conscious, but any...
Right, yeah.
Sure, maybe, yeah.
Just like any collection of neurons isn't necessarily conscious either. It has to be very distinct configuration and doing very certain things.
Yeah, because
Sure.
I just wanted to flag again, you used information processing as like the secret sauce here.
Yeah, in a very specific way.
I guess that's where we're at. Those we don't know what the specifics are.
Right.
Neither side of this discussion is pretending to.
Yeah, that I would absolutely cop to. That is where I think we are right now.
Okay, yeah.
I'm once again reduced to, but why this field then, if we already have the information processing and can point to that and be like, look, it's consciousness.
There's something that happens when you get the right ingredients in the information processing.
Yeah.
That makes it more sentient than my doorbell. So that's the thing that we're talking about, right?
That is the thing I'm talking about, yeah.
What's happening to information processing when it goes from not conscious, by which, again, I still only mean possessing experience, sense perception, qualia, whatever, not self-reflectivity, nothing, et cetera, et cetera. What's happening sometimes to information processing that it does that is clearly not sufficient. Is it necessary?
I don't want to get deep into this because then we're just going to reiterate the last episode again. But again, my position is that the right type of information processing is what experience is.
Okay. And yet I posit the field so as to explain experience.
That was my second question as to what other things can perturb the field and what differentiates them. Like, how can you tell the difference? How could we interrogate any of this? But I think we basically covered that.
Unless you have a way to access qualia from the outside of that qualia, then I also don't have one. Yeah.
All right. So you keep saying that you can't explain experience, even though you have unparalleled evidence for experience. I keep coming back to why even posit this field in the first place. How is it different from like when ancient man looked at their hand and said, when I want to move my hand move. I cannot explain what this is. There must be an animating spirit. How is the animating spirit different from the consciousness field?
Well, one, that would have been a great guess for a caveman.
Okay, that's fair.
To be fair, yeah, really good guess. Two, I don't think I agree that this is a good analogy. I think the magnets are a better analogy, and I was specifically going to bring that up at this time in the conversation, to which I have to say, basically, if you'll let me make the switch, the caveman looking at the rock that pushes the other rock, positing there must be some non-material spirit doing the work of pushing the rock, would have been making the same bet, and is basically right. It looks like that was it. So sometimes you're right about things. It seems like the best guess with the info we have, if you're not willing to say that qualia is uninteresting as a phenomenon to explore the source of. We only care about the correlates. I only care to write down what the rock sticks to. If you care about explaining the rock, then I think you need to start talking about, is there a field?
I think at the point where the caveman says, oh, it's an animating spirit, or it's an animating spirit of the rock that's making it do this, he stops writing down things and never gets to the point where he discovers physics and fields and all those other things.
Like, I'm sure some caveman posited that rocks were magic, or that magnets were magic, right? Some 21st century teenagers think that. So, like...
And they're not the ones that make progress on things. The people that do are the ones that write stuff down.
I'm actually really confused that this is the take you have on this, because it sounds to me like you're the one who's solved the problem of information processing and are good, and are going to move on to the next thing.
I think this is where the actual interesting stuff is. This is where you start looking into how the information is processed, what makes it special. I hope that our next guest is going to be a guy who talks about how the information is processed in oscillating waves in the brain. Like, this is the really exciting shit. Like, why is that the thing, right? But saying it must be some other weird force that we cannot interact with in any way and don't have any evidence of, aside from, oh, I experience things, like that's not interesting. It doesn't give you anything to work with and to be excited about.
I disagree, and I think that is the circumstance we're in. I'm not even biting that bullet. I'm saying that's not a bullet. That's a piece of candy, and it was fine. We are in that circumstance, and yet I'm still excited and interested about it. If I had no idea how magnets worked, me as current Steven, and saw one for the first time, and the person who handed it to me said, "There's an explanation for this," I would still be really curious and excited, right? Where did I fall off your analogy there?
The point where you start trying to explore the spirit world and find out how spirits interact, rather than explore the physical world and find out how particles interact.
I mean, I don't know when either of us signed on to using the word spirit, but like, because again, my position is that it's something physical that we'll find, and it'll either be subsumed into another. It'll expand our understanding of a currently known natural phenomena, or it'll be a new natural phenomena that we discover that explains the consciousness part.
I didn't mean to make you guys take on the spirit word. It's just that you said that the caveman saying magnets work with the magnetic spirit is a decent explanation.
No, I said that they were basically right as far as like when they were saying it's something non-physical. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Okay, but also it's not actually non-physical.
It's not physical in the way that the caveman's used to.
There is no magnet particle it's firing out machine gun style. It's generating a non-particulate field which is interacting with other things at a distance.
Right, so it's explainable by physics, but in terms that sounds like magic bullshit to somebody who doesn't know how magnets work, right?
Okay.
So I think that's what the explanation for consciousness will look like in some variety thereof.
Which, to be clear, is distinct from the neurons oscillating in the brain is what things does the magnet stick to, not how does the magnet work. I feel like this is the thing that I can't seem to bridge the gap on, is the difference between an explanation and a list of properties.
I disagree with you that is a correct analogy. I think the way neurons interact and the specific rules of how the information processing happens is what is going to tell us exactly what consciousness is, which is, I guess, just a difference in opinion right now, man.
Yeah, if you take that as given, yep.
I don't see any need to introduce new physics at the moment.
I like that I'm right here in the middle, because I think that it could be new physics and it could be current physics, but whatever it is, we don't have it yet. I don't think that the answer will be, well, oscillating neuronal activity. That doesn't give me...
Yeah, I think that's where you start. Well, I mean, you start various places, but that is one of the footholds along the way.
A week ago, you said that was the solution.
I was perhaps a bit hyperbolic in saying that is the ultimate solution. I think that is definitely a part of it. Kind of like electrons is a part of the answer for magnets, but, you can't just say electrons. There's a lot more about the interactions. For all I know, it could be a major chunk of the foundation. I'm not that well versed in it.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to say was, have you been listening to Stephen and Brian doing the dissection of Ubik in the Philip K. Dick podcast they got going?
I'm glad it's happening. I have not gotten to it yet, because the last few weeks I've been cramming for today.
Oh wow, okay. I'm really sorry. I hope I didn't disappoint you too terribly.
No, it's fine. Look, I did Ethics Bowl for 6 years. It was fun to have to actually learn things to argue about them again, instead of just making stuff up off the cuff and seeing where it goes.
I would say at the very least, listen to the first episode 00, because they don't actually talk about the book at all. They just talk about Gnosticism, because Philip K. Dick was really into it, and it was the basis of the novels that they're going to be talking about. I absolutely loved that episode. I loved getting a clear understanding of what Gnosticism is, because like I knew about half the stuff, but the other half was like, holy shit, that's awesome. One of the core things of Gnosticism is that they believe there's a divine spark inside of every human of just unalterable knowledge that this is true, even though it's literally impossible to prove it in the world due to the fact that how God made the world. Like we literally can't prove this, but we know it's true. And actually it is true. It's part of the whole metaphysics. When I hear you talking about like consciousness and how it is the one thing that we absolutely know for certain and it cannot be taken from us, and it's like nobody else can see it happening, it feels a lot like the divine spark idea. And like, I love the divine spark idea. I actually have an extremely strong emotional connection to it. Do you feel that's fair to say that maybe people are over fetishizing consciousness and saying like it is this mystical divine spark thing that we absolutely know is true, we can tell by our own experience, and that makes them extremely reluctant to accept a physicalist explanation?
There was a lot there.
Yeah.
So without speaking to any specific Gnostic theory, without looking into it, I agree that the core of what you're describing does sound a lot like what I think is a really coherent way to think about our knowledge of qualia, which is that we do have it for free, like a priori, no matter what. The fact of experience is indisputable as far as I can tell. Any attempt to dispute it, I think, falls down on creating like an illusion of it, which itself would have to then be experienced as it's being experienced. So,
and I think you're on board for that too, right, Eneasz? What would it take to convince you that you're not conscious right now? Is kind of where this is going.
It's interesting because apparently all it would take to convince me is some magnets aimed at a very specific region of the brain, since there is a disorder where people believe they don't exist despite walking around and talking to other people. It's really cool.
That isn't the same thing, but fine.
I don't place as much weight on this whole idea that an experience is that magical of a thing. It is, again, in my view, the working of neurons in certain special ways.
Hang on.
By special, I mean, lawfully executing a certain algorithm.
Oh, I think we're using the word special differently.
Yeah, not magical, but is it disputable? Is your sense perception, your fact of experience, disputable to yourself?
I think it's no more special than the idea that the outside world exists. I think those have equally strong evidence for them.
What?
Wait, sorry, hold on. Yeah, man, come on, Eneasz. You lost me there too, buddy.
You don't think that the outside world exists is as true as you have experience?
I think
No!
I think I am essentially more sure that I'm having experience than I am of the outside world, and I can demonstrate that to you too. You've had dreams.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's it. You've had experiences that didn't involve the outside world, but the experience is indisputable.
I don't think I could have had the dreams if there wasn't an outside world.
I mean,
So you find the brain in the jar theory, like, logically incomprehensible, despite being a brain in a jar made of bones.
I could very well be a brain in a jar in the Matrix for all I know, but I'm sure there's something outside there that's feeding these sense inputs into me for me to experience them. Like, I'm not experiencing nothing, right? There's something out there to be experienced.
It sounds like the common factor that we can't deny is experience.
I would say it is on equal footing.
But how is it equal footing when one of them could be anything and the other one is the common factor underlying all conceivable ways of being?
To me, they're on equal footing because you couldn't experience anything at all if there wasn't something to be experienced.
I think that you can be fooled about what you're experiencing, though. But you can't be fooled about whether or not... Like, so you can ask, was that a gunshot? You can't ask, was that a noise? Like, the experience part is deeper than the reality part.
I'm not entirely convinced that an illusion couldn't convince me that I'm having an experience when I'm not.
But then, when the
What would it
illusion
mean?
convinces you that you're having a sense perception, Like when the illusion convinces you that when you look at a red thing, you see a red thing. Isn't that just experience again, but like one epicycle further out?
Yes.
But the experience is there still at the base.
I may be too much of a physicalist for this to seem like a important distinction to me.
No, I'm 100%. I think in this, I think we're in the same level of physicalist agreement. But like, you saw Spider-Man Far From Home. I knew I could tie this back to Marvel, the one with Mysterio.
Nicely done. Oh wait, no, I didn't see that one.
It was good, but it was pretty good.
Okay.
But you're familiar with Mysterio,
Yeah, who makes you see things that aren't there.
Right.
Hallucination guy.
He makes you experience a reality that's not there.
Right, yeah.
But you're fooled about your experience. You're not fooled about whether or not reality is out there. You're misled about what reality is, but not about what you're experiencing.
It sounds like you're saying there's definitely a reality out there, though.
Right, but he's throwing, imaginary, or he's making you duck to dodge a non-existent projectile because you're experiencing that projectile coming at your face.
Isn't he the outside world then?
Yeah, but your experience is the core of what's happening there.
It's only via experience that you're finding out that there might be an outside world to feed you experience, right?
Yeah, they're strongly correlated. You can't have an experience without there being a world to have an experience in.
Why not?
Because then you wouldn't be having an experience.
Like, but you could be spending your entire life trapped in Mysterio's illusion or in the Matrix.
Yeah,
Like,
and then inputs are coming from the Matrix or from Mysterio.
right, but
There's something out there.
Okay. I don't know that I can bridge this gap in a short period of time, but this sounds completely crazy to me in a way that none of the other stuff did. I didn't agree with the other stuff, but this is way out there.
I mean, I think experience is great. I just, it seems to be very much predicated on there being a reality to have it in.
You would 100% think that I'm a Gnostic then. Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Anyone else, I'd have a bunch of like qualifications, but now that I've had this, yep, you're going to think I'm 100% on board.
Cool. I mean, the main reason I love the Gnostics is because they thought that the actual world is different from what we perceive, and that is fucking awesome for me.
When Brian was describing it, it felt very Morpheus explaining to Neo why he felt weird.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think I see where you're coming from, Eneasz, that like there has to be something out there to cause experience.
I think this just might be a consequence of me being like, experience is, information processing in a certain way. If there isn't information to process, there wouldn't be experience. So maybe that's where I'm falling down here.
Right, because A is the A of B. I get it.
Well, I think I get it too. Like in a like I think I actually get it, but I'm just trying to clarify. So like you imagine something, you paint out some scenario in your head. It impacts your feelings or something, right? Like nothing in reality happened. You were other than you sitting there thinking. Reality didn't do anything.
Sure, no, I mean, I agree there, but I wouldn't have had anything to create those fantasies of if I hadn't had some experiences with the outside world before.
Okay, yeah. So I think I see what you're saying. Like there can't be experience devoid of any context.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what are you experiencing?
Right.
Okay, Liam, does that jive? Because I think that clicks for me.
I think that's aggressively dodging the question and like retreating into... So sure, in some sense, but you think that the experience could be arbitrary and completely uncorrelated to truth? I guess, but I should doubt that in a way that I shouldn't doubt the fact of experience. If I'm in the Matrix, I should doubt the Matrix. I shouldn't doubt, am I experiencing the Matrix?
Right. Yeah, thank you, Liam. You kept your eye on the ball and I lost it. I was going to save this for like the post-episode recording, because it sounds too flattery to put on the air or whatever. But damn, dude, you are smart and really good at this.
Hell yeah.
I admire the hell out of it, and it makes me wish my brain was better. But I don't want to just like wistfully, throw in the towel there. It makes me want to aspire to greater heights because it is admirable, like the skill that you have at this, and I want it.
Yeah. No, it feels a lot like sparring with like a black belt when you're a blue belt, right? You're like, holy shit, this guy's amazing. And perhaps he is fighting for the wrong side, but oh my god, he's amazing.
It's impossible for me to be on the wrong side of anything. I just need to talk long enough.
This is a true point.
For what it's worth, I haven't found anything of like substantive disagreement. Maybe I don't know if you signed off on this or not, but like, is it possible in principle to you that like we could find the thing that, like you said, here's the envelope, we figured out consciousness? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you and I are in the same boat.
The problem is, I don't know what it could be. And
Me
even
either.
in principle, I don't see a way to get there from any of the physics that I know. So I'm very amenable to the idea that, like, there's got to be some other thing going on. So I'm not like, I don't recoil in fear when I hear somebody positing an additional feature of reality, because it's just reality.
Would you feel satisfied with someone coming along, like if that was the answer and someone came along and was like, yeah, man, there's just a field out there and it vibrates in a certain way when atoms do things? Would you be like, oh, okay, I'm glad that explains my feelings of qualia?
If that was the only sentence they said, no. But I can definitely conceive of ways that conversation could go that would provide an explanation. Like, some explanations just aren't satisfying, but they're still explanations. And I think there's this field. We did some science at it. Yeah, I could see that doing the explaining for us.
Liam, welcome back. I had to follow up questions that I thought of yesterday, and Stephen is busy at work, so he can't join us. I'll try to make these quick.
Yeah, no problem at all. Always happy to elaborate.
The first thing I was thinking, I don't want to sound like a jerk when I say this, but I still feel like maybe you're lying to yourself and you would not actually be happy with any sort of physical explanation given. The reason I say this is because I want to postulate for a moment that we do find this new laws of physics, that there is this other field that our atoms perturb or something. I get the distinct impression that nonetheless, if scientists discovered that and did all these measurements and found all these things about it, and like, I don't know, when neurons act in a particular way while you're conscious, they set up these standing waves that have this amplitude or this frequency, and that is what consciousness is. I still think that you would come back and say, okay, but why is it that when this field has a frequency of X and an amplitude of Y, do I feel things? Why is it something that it feels like to have amplitude X and frequency Y in a field?
Mm-hmm.
Do you not think you would say that?
Based on the story you've just told, and not what I recall as being what we had been talking about last night, probably if you just had a scientist walk up and say, hey, when I have X amplitude at frequency Y, then consciousness. Like, if that's all they gave me, you're right. I would not find that persuasive. I probably wouldn't be persuaded by, well, when you have X thing at frequency Y, then obviously we've developed consciousness. There I go. I've done a physical theory of consciousness. I would probably say to that, well, but that doesn't explain anything at all. I don't think that is to say that I'm like out of hand rejecting any notion of a physical explanation of consciousness, but whatever it is would need to be explanatory of the features of consciousness to the degree that it turns out there's magnetic fields is explanatory of the features of magnets. So just a frequency and an amplitude, I don't think would do it, but I also don't think that makes me unable to be persuaded entirely.
Sure. I mean, maybe it's a lot more complicated and you have to have these patterns oscillating in the field that make certain something. But just based on how physics works and science in general, what you're going to ultimately end up with is equations and numbers that dictate how particles and forces interact. And I still think that any sort of physical explanation like that is going to reduce to that, and you're going to end up saying, but why does it feel like something when these oscillating waves at this intensity are moving through the field of consciousness?
Well, let me give a couple examples of how I don't think that's the only way we explain things in physics.
Okay.
I agree that I can ground everything out all the way down into being numbers. Like, eventually, we're talking about the location of quarks when we're doing physics stuff, typically, or whatever's more fundamental than that. But if I was to say, well, why is it ice takes up more volume than water? The answer to that question does involve the particles of the water linking together into hexagons, and that takes up more space because it's crystallized. But I can tell that explanatory story about, well, here's how that happened. We took up more space because those hexagons needed to form crystals, and the crystal is bigger than just random mushed together particles, and that's why it expands a little bit. And so an explanation on that level would be totally fine and amenable to me. And I don't think that you need to chase that all the way down to what's the most fundamental particle that's involved.
I understand what you're saying. I still think that any sort of explanation along that line could always be followed up with, but why does it feel like something for X, for hexagon crystals or whatever.
Well, why does it feel like something is the hard part, and that's the part that is it's the hard part, and that's the part that is hard. I agree that I don't see any obvious way that I could bridge that gap. I don't think that's necessarily indicative that like there's no way to bridge the gap. And similarly, isn't that kind of a thing that we would say about many things that are difficult? Like the hard part to explain is the volume increasing. You just need to explain the volume increasing. The fact that I don't see how, clearly there is an answer. We do appear to have consciousness. I just don't know what it is.
I just think the answer is going to reduce to something like that, and it'll continue to be unsatisfactory.
I hope not.
Okay. The second follow-up question I had was real quick. We touched on the teleporting thing, but then the whole episode went so long, we never went back to the teleporting thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going with the idea right now that posited maybe consciousness is some kind of fluctuations in this field of consciousness that Chalmers was talking about. When you are experiencing anything over time, that is the field fluctuating in, I'm assuming, some lawful way from time A to time B.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that if the field fluctuation moved very rapidly from one point in the field to a different point in the field, then they don't count as the same person anymore?
I think the best answer I can give you, well, one, I'm actually not entirely sure what Chalmers' take on teleporting is, but I'm guessing it aligns with what I'm about to say. It's roughly, if I take it to be the case that like I have this brain and the brain is doing neuronal things, and that's causing via qualia.
Mm-hmm.
Further, what I care about when I talk about me is the experiential version of me. So I'm not particularly attached to the physical body that I'm inside of. I'm attached to the continuous stream of experience. And typically when we talk about teleporters, we kill the one that won into the teleporter, right? We have another one that walked out over there, but the person who goes in gets like atomized.
Kill is a pejorative term for that, but yes, atomized.
All right, well, let's say I open a teleporter shop and I say the exit is in Mars. You can't check, but it's definitely there. Please step into the teleport, and then I atomize you.
Yeah.
I would say I've done, at the very least, manslaughter. Probably one of the murders.
Are we assuming, though, that I do step out on the other side on Mars?
No,
this wasn't just a joke to atomize somebody, and there's no one on the other side at Mars.
I'm saying that in this example I've set up with the Mars thing, nothing's on Mars. I'm lying.
Oh, yeah, that's just murder. Okay.
You still blow up, right?
Right. Yeah.
So my worry is, if I think that there's some question mark underlying the connection between my brain and like experiential existence, then I don't want to roll the dice that can transfer. And similarly, it feels very intuitive that, well, if I step into a teleporter that doesn't dissolve me, I would still be here, and so would the other Liam on the other end. So these clearly are consistently thought of as two different entities. It's not clear to me why that isn't just someone else who's really similar to me in ways.
After the transportation, you diverged into two different people. I guess my question was, since who you are, your experiences, your qualia is the pattern of perturbations in the consciousness field.
Yeah.
You're not okay just with those patterns stopping in one place and starting in another place real quick. They have to like slowly move through the field rather than instantly being moved from one place to another?
Probably. I think continuity seems important. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on how the field works. I can conceive of a version of this hypothetical field wherein it would be totally fine to shut it down and then open it up somewhere else. And since it's fundamental, like how it plays with space even is a little bit unclear. Should I think of my qualia as happening at my location? I don't know. I can watch stuff from a security room. So I guess the short version is I'm skeptical because it seems like the story I need to tell is that I walk into a booth and then all of my atoms are disassembled, and I think that would kill someone. So definitely I want my friends and loved ones to teleport all they want. Doesn't matter. Go for it. Really convenient. But like me...
See, I was a little confused because it is the atoms that are being disassembled and reassembled somewhere else, and you were very explicit about the atoms are not the consciousness, the atoms just perturb the field. So if, the exact same configuration of atoms somewhere else restarted the field perturbation in the exact position it was before,
Mhm.
that shouldn't matter because, as you had said, the atoms don't matter. It's the field that matters.
I definitely agree that the person on the other end of the teleporter will have all the same feelings. I agree they are perfectly interchangeable to everyone else in existence. No problem.
Except for some reason, you would be able to tell that you're a different person.
Well, I think I would be dead, maybe, is my worry.
So there's a brand new person who happens to be exactly identical to you in every way, including thinking that he's you, but he's just wrong about that.
Yeah, that seems super plausible. 100%. Yeah.
Okay, it seems crazy to me, but if that is what we're going with, then I can't really gainsay it.
I just can't think of any place where it breaks down, you know? Because why does the destroying this copy help?
Oh, because you don't necessarily want to have two of you splitting all your resources every single time you teleport somewhere. I would like my resources to not go down like that. And honestly, I don't want to remain behind on Earth as well with half my resources. I would just like to go all of me to Mars and take all my resources with me, including resources like, the relationships that I have with friends.
Right. Well, here's a really easy solution. We set up the we set up the booth. We fire you off to Mars. You arrive on Mars, you go do your job. Then we pull you off to the side back on Earth, having not been atomized, and explain, hey, we've just done you a huge favor. We're not going to tell your Mars copy, but they're going to do all the work. You just hang out with your friends. And when they teleport back to Earth, we're just going to wipe them. No more copy. Where's the problem?
Oh my God. That... And you're presuming that there's going to be like no communications with the people on Earth, so that the Mars person would never find out.
Yeah, we don't tell them. We do not tell the Mars person. They just think they're doing their job. We didn't warn you in advance that this was a scheme, so they don't have any memory of it being a problem. And then when they get back into the teleporter, we just put them back into soup for the next.
This sounds like it's probably had been a science fiction story somewhere before, and I love the idea.
It probably is a science fiction story somewhere. This is too clean of an idea to not already have been written about. But since you can conceive of it, then...
Yeah, somebody might do that. I think it would probably be very unethical.
But is that someone else?
At the moment of transport, no. Once your experiences diverge, then, it's you living a different timeline and a different experience.
But you wouldn't feel any of the things that they feel, right?
Yeah, you would start diverging immediately.
Okay. But if I'm not feeling any of the things they feel when I'm alive, why am I feeling any of the things they feel when I'm atomized?
What? You don't?
Oh, I think dying is bad.
I think dying is bad too.
Hang on.
Did we miss the part where you're the same person at the instant of teleportation?
Yes, same person at the instant teleportation. Like perfectly exact. Well, except for location.
Yeah.
One of them's over somewhere else.
Yeah, that's all I want. I want to be the same person, just somewhere else.
I think the core disagreement here is I don't have the degree of faith that you have that preserves the kind of phenomenal life that I am worried about when I say dying is bad.
And I'm not surprised by that, because you very much seem to not have the intuition that we are physics and all the things that come along with it. Like, it seems there's some core soul, divine spark, identity, something which has to be preserved, which I don't believe in. Like the pattern of experience that is me, the pattern of thoughts or information processing or whatever you want to call it, consciousness, that is me, and you don't have a special extra thing.
I feel like to me, it sounds like you are the one who is pretending that physicalism doesn't work on this one.
Why's that?
Because it's a different thing, right? Like if let's say I take a brick and I smash it, and then I walk across the street and I reform it with some pottery stuff.
Okay.
Would you be fine with that if you were the brick?
I wouldn't be fine or not be fine with anything because I don't have conscious experience as a brick.
I've walked into that one.
I'm sorry.
Now I see it. Even presuming that we are hardcore straight physicalism, I definitely don't have the follow-up intuition that a physical copy of me in a different location removes the badness of atomizing the copy that I am currently.
Okay. I do. That's the same reason why I'm signed up to get cryopreserved, right? I think if you restart me 100 years in the future in the same location, it's me again. Or if you restart me 100 miles away at the same time, it's still me.
I think cryo is definitely a good guess, by which I mean I would much prefer to be cryopreserved than just die classic. But I do think the hope of cryo is in the ballpark of the hope of teleportation or the hope that, like, anesthesia doesn't meaningfully break that continuity. I care a lot about the continuity.
Yeah.
But I think this is all poking at the same sort of thing. So I don't think it's a guarantee, but it's for the same reason I'd rather not go under full anesthesia.
Okay. The other thing was your idea that we can prove things without any sort of evidence. When you're working within a system like logic or math, you can prove that things follow the rules of that system or don't follow the rules of that system. But that's very different from showing that something actually exists in the real world. Like, you actually need to show that it exists in the real world, or otherwise you start believing crazy things like there is infinite beta 2 people, and that proves that God wants there to be infinite beta 2 people, and that proves that God loves everybody and wants us to be happy, but only if he sacrifices his son. Like, that kind of crazy shit.
So you're, correct me if I'm wrong, a pretty committed Bayesian though, right?
Yeah.
What I'm hearing sounds a lot like I don't accept that proofs by mathematics are Bayesian evidence.
They're evidence of things about mathematics. And in so much as the physical world runs on math, then they correspond. But the ancient Greeks logically proved a lot of things which turned out to be nonsense.
I think they were wrong about a lot. So is what I'm hearing that you think you can prove things which aren't about the location of atoms using logic, and that's good evidence? That's all I need.
Things that are about the location of atoms is a very fuzzy term which encompasses almost everything. Like, the only thing that's excluded there is literally formal systems, right? Things that are rules that we made up.
I'm not convinced, although I am torn, that math is rules we made up as opposed to rules we figured out.
I'm actually very close to you on that. I think math is basically the language of the universe. But the thing is, math is the language of the universe, and it corresponds to the universe. Like, the universe always wins in the end.
Hang on, let me see if I can give an example. I know there was a specific example where once we had proposed relativity made some very specific predictions about how light should navigate passing past the sun towards the Earth, right? I'm sure this is a story you've heard before. Before somebody went to a solar eclipse and checked, would you have said relativity is not evidence of this thing we haven't checked? Because at that point, all we had was the logic and we had the math, and I think that was evidence of its own accord. Not perfect evidence, but evidence in the sense that a Bayesian might say something is evidence. By gathering data, I would say we got better evidence, we got a different kind of evidence in some sense, maybe. We got stronger evidence, we have much better reason to believe the logic wasn't flawed. But the logic working out was enough evidence to go check. So where am I disconnected from what you're saying in that chunk?
If what I understand about the history of relativity is correct, there were a lot of things that were observed about the universe which relativity also explained, as well as the current model. And there were some things about the universe that we didn't quite understand, which relativity could explain. But until somebody went and actually checked some of the things that were verifiable, it's still one of those like, well, this could very well be it, but somebody has to check because you don't accept it until you have actual evidence.
Maybe I need to go refresh myself on Bayes' rule, because I think you're doing it badly. I think that is evidence. It's weak Bayesian evidence, but it's clearly evidence.
I would give you weak Bayesian evidence if it also explains everything else just as well, and under the same mechanism gives an explanation for things that we don't currently know. That seems like a good reason to go and test this thing.
Epiphenomenalism definitionally explains everything observable exactly as well as non-epiphenomenal. Like, that's the point of it.
Yeah, it explains everything, and when you explain everything, you explain nothing. When you prove that 0 equals 1, when you prove a contradiction, you can prove literally everything, and that is why it's useless.
I cannot, via epiphenomenalism, prove that the U.S. stock market is about to crash. If it could prove anything, it could prove that. I can't prove via epiphenomenalism that the atomic weight of helium is anything in particular. How would it? It can only conceivably make claims about stuff that is, at least in some sense, one layer abstracted from like the base physical state. So maybe I could make claims about math via epiphenomenalism. I'm pretty sympathetic to that. I could definitely make claims about things which are more abstract, like the notion of a state. That's sort of one level abstract. I can't naively look at atoms and conclude anything about the character of a country. I think your claim is clearly too broad. Now, the criticism epiphenomenalism can justify too much, yeah, for sure. But everything? I don't know. I don't know about that.
The point is that if you're confused about something and someone says, my epiphenomenal thing, in this case, a field, explains it, there's no reason to believe that. And there never will be. The question that both me and Eliezer come back to is like, why even posit something that will never be able to be shown to actually explain the thing? It's the Deepak Chopra thing. You just say like, this explains it, but you can't ever prove it. It doesn't interact with the real world in any way. You just kind of have to believe it.
I think the most core disagreement we have on this comes down to what it means to explain something.
Could something that does not interact with the universe in any way ever be thought of as explaining something?
Potentially, yeah. If you don't take it as tautological that qualia is like this additional second thing that's going on, I don't see any reason naively to presume that even a really complicated analog calculator like a human brain or a cat brain or a flatworm, I don't see any reason naively to add more features to it other than input goes in, input goes out. So I think taking it at its face, the question of qualia already is in a really weird place where it doesn't seem to be accessible. It doesn't appear to be happening in any obviously physical way. So any attempt to explain, by which I mean generate a theory of qualia as opposed to listing facts of qualia, in the sense that I might discuss a theory of gravity explaining the behavior of gravity by showing that, well, it's just warping in space-time. Everything's actually moving in a straight line. It creates this illusion of a pull, but it's just warping in this other more fundamental thing. And that explains gravity in a way that just saying stuff falls proportional to mass doesn't explain gravity. I want a theory, and I think due to its nature, we need to make some guesses until somebody shows up with a science briefcase and they say they figured it out. I love that to happen. That'd be a really cool day.
Long before anyone could propose a theory of gravity or a theory of magnetism or a theory of anything, they had to make lots and lots of observations and just write down the observations. Then eventually there was enough data to pour over, to think about, to correlate, to come up with some sort of equation and framework to explain what causes all this data. And I don't think you can just skip all that part and start positing things at random.
Well, hang on. Surely I'm not the one who's trying to skip past the theory part.
I'm the one trying to measure what's happening in the brain. Well, I mean, okay, not me personally, but people like me.
Even presuming strict physicalism, a thing that I am intellectually capable of, I don't understand why you're able to go from, we've noticed that consciousness seems to be associated with this neuron spike loop going around. When we can see this loop happening, and this loop seems to happen when people are conscious. I truly do not follow when you make the next claim, which is, well, that's obvious, mission accomplished, right? We did it. Neuron spike loops explain qualia. I don't see it. I need the theory of why that causes qualia. Even a level higher. Like, there's clearly another thing going on. Brains are complicated. You come back to me with research from 10 years from now when they go, oh, the neuron spike loops also are to go in an oval. Oh, well, the oval explains it. The oval justifies, makes natural, allows me to see that it couldn't ever not be the case that there is qualia.
So I'm curious as to, like, how much about the neurobiology you've read, because I will cop to not having read nearly that much compared to the people who are actually researching this, right? Like, I'm an interested hobbyist.
So I'm not a neurobiologist. I could probably describe the action of neuron activation. I could describe in much less detail the ways that information is therefore transmitted via receptors from the tail of one neuron to the body of another. I could probably take like a not totally incorrect shot at what is the mechanism by which we see neurons grow and initially connect to each other.
You've done some reading. In what of that reading was there ever a suggestion that like there is a field being agitated or something that has no effect back on physics?
No, I didn't see that in the reading.
So why this specific hypothesis out of everything that one could possibly believe?
I also didn't see in the reading anything that could coherently or obviously do the theory of consciousness. And in fact, I probably became less confident as I did it that explaining neurons better would ever get me across that gap.
Yeah.
So the reason you might postulate another thing happening isn't necessarily that a neurobiologist told me there is a secret epiphenomenal field.
Mhm.
It's that I have evidence of this weird stuff going on that I can't explain just using the neurons. And
Mhm.
since I can't explain it just using the neurons, a thing that I might appeal to is, well, perhaps there's this field that has many of the qualities that appear to be there, the qualities that I naturally would expect to see in something that was interacting directly with qualia. So possibly the field is qualia itself. But from there, you start to spin out into how I need to apply reason to this problem because just looking at the atoms doesn't seem to be getting me there.
And I agree that looking at the atoms doesn't really get you there, but I think you just went in the wrong direction. If you go out further into how networks of these things interact, that is where it starts to gel.
Does it start to gel?
I think so, yeah.
How much networking theory do I need to learn before and I don't even need a full answer. I just need something that I can look at it and go, I can kind of see the bones of how in 30 years someone could talk me through this and it would make sense.
Well, I don't know. Come back after the next episode. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more chipped away at that.
Okay, I'll listen to it.
Okay. All right, that's everything. Thank you for spending this. Good God. Oh, I hate my life.
Yeah, quick 5 minutes, huh?
So I'm so sorry for taking your time, and I'm very sorry for me, because that means I have far more editing than I was hoping for.
Yeah, condolences. This might be a long one for you. I apologize.
It's all right. This has been fantastic. I'm going to cut back into the rest of the episode here now.
That's how I know you and I are going to be lifelong friends, that you just said do science at it. I say that, and I didn't. No, I'm not the only one. That's where I land.
But what if he says that your dear old grandma should die, Stephen? Might not be friends then.
Would Liam say that?
Well, if Liam was arguing Malcolm's point for some reason.
I say a lot of things.
I get the impression that despite whatever, I think you could more convincingly argue deathism than Malcolm and Simone did. I don't think that you would. I don't think that you could do it in a way that was true to you, who you are. But maybe I'm just projecting nice stuff into you via halo effect.
I remember them. I've listened to some of their stuff. It seems very fun. I do think I could argue it, but I'm not convinced at all. It seems obviously bad.
Yeah, me too. I was trying to explain it to my wife's parents because I was on an episode shortly after, and they were like, "Yeah, you were really nice, even like you kind of disagreed on like the probability of cryonics stuff or whatever." And I was like, "That was like not trying to be nice. That's just basic human courtesy. Me trying to be nice." And I explained it to Malcolm and Simone episode about death. To be clear, they were nice, and I loved talking with them, except for that conversation. But I was like, no, that's where like I had to like bite my tongue and try and be polite. And even then, I like actually that's the most emotionally incensed I've ever been doing this podcast.
You did a really good job, like keeping it down. I could tell because I know you. I don't think most people would have been able to tell that you were really upset.
Well, and by really upset, it just meant like it blipped. Like I didn't like go home mad about it or anything.
Right.
Like it just
got your dander up.
That was my version of like But where was I going with this?
I think Liam was going to tell us something about. Jesus, I don't even remember now. Was it sex?
Oh, gender. Yeah, you wanted to...
Gender, that's right.
You wanted to know about... Okay, so bear with me.
Yeah, let's move from consciousness fluid to gender fluid. And this will be specifically for the patrons, so if you guys put in like the first minute or two here, and then if you guys want to hear the rest, you are going to have to pay money.
Deeply respectable. So while I was doing Too Rash, Too Unadvised, we started with the Terragnata series. And the Terragnata series has a lot of thoughts about gender. And a problem with that is, gender is like this big trick everyone's playing on everyone. And I think most of the info you get from people, even people who've tried to think about it, is designed to confuse and trick you. If you want to understand what, like, gender people are talking about when they're talking about gender, you need to stop thinking of it as, like, a thing, because it isn't, and you need to start thinking about it as just, like, an ambition. I think Judith Butler has pitched gender...
I think that articulates it perfectly.
Yeah, and that's why it makes sense.
I love it.
It's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And also thank you for joining us again and talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I had a great time, man. I would love to talk more on or off the air, whatever you want to do. I'll join. I'll be more active on the Discord, just to chat with you more.
Yeah, great. Always happy to chat.
The Discord suffers from the text curse, as we were talking about before. Having the same conversation in Discord as you can have here will take 3 times as many hours.
Yeah.
That is true. I just tried it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. With who?
With you.
Oh.
Right now.
Right. This took much less time than when we were an entire day on the Discord.
It's fine. I work from home.
Yeah, it was fun.
But no, it was great. If there's ever anything that you guys want me to come back on and talk about, I'm more than happy to do that. If either of you ever catch up to what we're reading, open invitation. We will let anyone on my podcast. There are no standards.
All right, sounds like I clear that bar. Hell yeah.
Do you know what you're reading after Lent?
Yeah, we're actually starting Citeen next week. Oh,
I've read Citeen.
Great, don't tell me anything about it.
Okay, well, I'll shut my mouth right now.
But we start that next. I think we have 1 or 2 little interstitials. We're going to redo all of our Patreon stuff. Buzzsprout, we need to take Terragnata off, put that on. But we're launching into a new book, yeah.
Awesome.
All right, well, everyone check out Too Rash, Too Unadvised. If you enjoyed Liam's demeanor and capability here, I'm going to read Terragnata so I can listen to your podcast as soon as I finish Ubik.
Fair enough. We'd love to have you on. And you guys actually left way more of the plug in last time than I thought you would. I was rambling because I thought I was going to get cut.
Cutting things is time expensive. I do a lot of it. I think I generally spend 2 to 2.5 hours for every 1 hour of audio that we get, which is just a lot. I want to not do quite as much, so much cutting. And actually, that's not entirely fair because some of that time is also used, getting the links and putting the post up. So it's not entirely just audio cutting.
There is software that will transcribe all of the audio, so you can search through the text and find when that was said in the waveform. Oh,
I like going through it all again to refresh my memory, and I would just have to read the entire text rather than listening to the text. So I don't think it would change anything for me.
Well, condolences. I hate editing audio.
It's not so bad. Again, the listening to it again, I really like. It does help cement things in my mind. It's just that, right now I'm looking at probably 6-7 hours to do this episode. And that's that's a whole day, but okay.
That's going to be a lot.
I'm convinced you could put in 60% of the effort and people wouldn't notice. Or they maybe notice 10% dip.
Yeah, I never know about that because probably there's a lot of it is kind of a subconscious thing, where over time people will move away from a podcast and listen to it less, and they don't particularly know why. And I'm like, well, if I can prevent that 10% from happening that way, it's probably worth a few hours.
I do think most of the value of good audio editing is all in stuff that the audience should not be aware of.
Yeah.
They should never be thinking about what happened to make this sound right. So that makes it tough.
And also, I've always kind of when you've got, a few listeners, that's not as big a deal. But when you got a couple thousand listeners, and I think if I can trim this from 2 hours and 10 minutes to 2 hours, that is 10 minutes of saved life experience multiplied by 2,000 people. The utilitarian calculus starts to be maybe I can spend an extra few hours on it. Still, it's easier to listen to a podcast that's a little shorter, and maybe you'll listen to it more often.
Well, that part I'm on board with, but you implying that there's anything better they could be doing with those 10 minutes is insulting to the podcast.
Well, when I see an 80,000, 80,000 hours, it's a pretty good podcast. But when I see an 80,000 hours podcast, that's 3 hours.
I listen to one of those a month, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I'm just I'm not going to download this one. I'll download the next one. That's only an hour and a half.
Yeah, I'm a quarter. We should stop recording at some point.
Okay, real quick then. Liam, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
What he said.
Bye.
We had some feedback. One quick one here from Wes.
All right, let's do it then.
Wes says, I think you guys missed the most obvious example of P-Zombies IRL. Sleepwalkers sometimes just do people stuff but aren't conscious. And I thought about that example. I guess it's not clear to me where they would fit on the, especially like after this most recent episode, maybe this question would be phrased differently or in a different light. They're definitely responding to stimuli and doing things. I think they just don't have memories of being conscious, or rather, they don't have memories of the experiences they're having, but they're having experiences.
I have no idea. Are they having experiences?
I mean, they're processing their environment. Right?
Yeah.
Because they're not crashing into walls. But I've only sleptwalked the one time when I was like single-digit years old.
Oh.
And I just woke up on the stairs. So I don't know exactly what I was doing, but I certainly don't remember getting there.
But I don't know, like it could entirely be that like you were conscious and processing things and just don't remember it, or it could be some sort of semi-autonomous reaction, but without any consciousness behind it.
I think both are possible. We should have Liam here for that one, but like there's definitely the case of people coming out of anesthesia, who are able to talk and tell you and be accurate, like accurately solve problems, but they don't remember stuff.
Right, yeah.
There's like a cool window of time where that happens. I think those people are conscious. They're just blackout drunk, essentially.
Yeah.
The sleepwalker, I don't think they'd make good P-Zombies because I don't think I could get a sleepwalker to argue to me that they're conscious.
Okay, that's a good point.
I think they're typically too incoherent. My sister used to sleepwalk to the point where I saw it at least once, but I wasn't at the first philosophically experimental age at the time.
Yeah.
She would have also been doing it when she was single-digit years old, maybe.
Neat. Can you imagine like being in medieval times and seeing that? It would totally look like your family member's possessed by something.
Oh, totally. I forget what special it was, but I think it's his first one on Netflix. Mike Birbiglia is a stand-up comedian who has just the most intense amount of sleepwalking disorder that I've ever heard of. But he sleeps in mittens and a sleeping bag that is fastened to the point where he can't, with his unconscious dexterity, unfasten the sleeping bag and get the mittens off.
Wow.
He was at a hotel once, traveling for stand-up, and he jumped out he broke through the window as he jumped out of it.
Jesus, man.
Yeah. So, I don't think I could pause him before he jumped out and be like, hey, hold on, convince me you're conscious.
Right. Yeah. If he doesn't even have the mental acuity to take off some mittens, which I'm assuming is pretty easy for him when he wakes up like normal, then there's definitely some different sort of mental activity.
Totally.
Much lesser type.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know who is not sleepwalking through life?
You and me.
And the Guild of the Rose.
Oh, yes, of course. If you want to do the opposite of sleepwalk through life, you should check out the Guild of the Rose. It doesn't cost anything. They don't want your social security number or whatever. 3 days ago, as of this recording, they had a cool community update email. TLDR on it is they're broadcasting social events, and they've got a regular meeting on meaning and spirituality. Eneasz, were you aware?
No, but now I'm very interested.
Every other Tuesday.
Holy crap balls. All right, I'm going.
All right. And some new workshops, including prompt engineering, and they're going to be updating the skill tree and stuff too. Raven had a nice long section in here talking about some changes that she plans on making. So, anyway, the Guild of the Rose, as we mentioned, and y'all should be aware of, is a IRL/online rationalist dojo. Join and hone your skills, make your life better in every regard, from finances to utilizing AI tools to spirituality and meaning.
And you'll be part of an online and in some places IRL rationalist community, which is just a huge life upgrade.
Yeah. The only place where you can go to it in real life is Denver, but going to it online is just as good for the most part. Has a lot of the perks. Yeah. It certainly beats the hell out of training yourself as a rationalist alone in your basement. So
right. Well, if you want to do that, you can go to guildoftheRose.org or a link in our show notes.
That's the place.
Thanks. All right. Moving on, let us do our Less Wrong posts, yes?
Yes.
Our last two episodes were inspired by the zombies post and one of the follow-up posts, I guess. And there's two more follow-up posts, which we will zip through pretty quickly here. because I think they don't really address the actual thing that Chalmers was talking about, and so they're not really all that relevant.
Well, we could be just talking about the almost Chalmers style zombies, but I think we did a pretty good job covering these in the last 2 episodes.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll push through them. But the generalized anti-zombie principle.
That is the first one. Real short TLDR is that it's about a switch that if you push the switch, it'll turn off your consciousness. In our analogy that the three of us were talking about, it probably like a device that makes your atoms stop affecting the consciousness field or mess up the connection in some way so it doesn't vibrate right to make consciousness or something, so that, all your atoms are still doing all your things, but there's no consciousness there, is what this supposed switch would do.
Yeah, which to me sounds a lot like, let me press this button and suddenly this magnet will stop working. It would really have to rattle the laws of physics to do that.
Well, it would, except the magnet wouldn't stop working because the magnet is still doing physical stuff. It would just remove the magnetness of the magnet, but it still does all magnet things.
maybe that doesn't translate to that analogy.
Yeah.
You're right. So like the thing is like, it's not clear to me, and I don't think Liam or even Chalmers really would sign on to that. Maybe Chalmers would. I can't model him that well. Would sign on to this idea of a button that would turn off his consciousness.
Oh, I think they totally would. Because if the idea is that there's some other law of physics, then maybe you can make a device that interacts with those physics. Like, how before we couldn't take pictures of people's bones with x-rays because we didn't know how x-rays worked, and now we do, and now we can. This would be like an x-ray that, not quite an x-ray, but again, using new physics that we don't know to make new effects.
That beats me to the line I was going to say, which is that it would essentially need to be magic, and it would be sufficiently advanced technology that would look magic.
Yes.
I remember I was at a one of James Randi's amazing meetings. I think it was Dawkins asked him, couldn't somebody come to you and claim your $1 million? James Randi had the $1 million paranormal challenge, where if you can demonstrate a supernatural, paranormal, or occult ability under controlled test conditions, you'd get $1 million.
Yeah.
Dawkins asked him, couldn't somebody come along with something like the equivalent of radio before radio was widely known or discovered and fool you? Randy sat and thought about it for a minute, and he said, yeah, I suppose they would, but then we would have publicized the discovery of the radio. I think that'd be an okay use of the money.
Yeah. What a cool guy.
Right. But I think to that effect, or in that same vein, like this consciousness stopping button would have to be that same kind of Clarke's third law level of technology.
Absolutely. When Liam said that Eliezer doesn't really talk about Chalmers' hypothetical, I think this is why. Eliezer says that anything that makes your consciousness go out like a light should make you stop talking about consciousness. Let me know if you don't think this is right, but to me this sounds just like a massive misunderstanding of Chalmers, because the way we talked about it, consciousness doesn't have any effect on anything that happens in real life. Everything continues happening exactly the same way, whether there's consciousness or not. It's just that, I don't know, there's no experiencer experiencing things trapped in the consciousness plane. Or I would say trapped in the consciousness plane. I guess Liam would too, but I guess it doesn't feel that bad for him to be trapped. I was really, really weirded out by that whole interaction.
Maybe we need another couple hours, because I actually don't think that we addressed this level of question there, because I'm not sure if Liam's version of consciousness has no effect on what happens. In Liam's explanation, what would make a P-zombie write a book about consciousness? In one version of that, he just said the typewriting monkeys, but that wouldn't translate to like turning consciousness off.
Yeah, I don't know if this was just for the sake of arguing Chalmers' point, but he went along with all the laws of physics are the same. The particles that make up our brains make us type things, and therefore the P-zombie would still type. Zombie David Chalmers would still write the book about consciousness and argue the same things.
Fair enough.
So yeah, then Eliezer says that even after switch is flipped, I will still talk about consciousness for exactly the same reasons I did before. If I'm conscious right now, I will still be conscious after you flip the switch. And I think this is where the breakdown happens, because the first line is correct, that after you flip the switch, the physical body will still talk about consciousness for exactly the same reasons, because it's still got those atoms moving. But the second line is his misunderstanding, because those atoms moving also makes a consciousness field create something that feels stuff, even though it can't affect anything. And so he would still talk about consciousness for the exact same reasons, but wouldn't be conscious anymore. I think it may sound like I'm being harsh on this post right here, or harsh on Eliezer for writing this post and misunderstanding Chalmers, but I really think he did it because he was interpreting Chalmers in the most sane way possible. Like, literally everything happens for the exact same reasons, but the consciousness just doesn't happen is an insane position, in my opinion. And I can't fault Eliezer for assuming that Chalmers is not insane and trying to engage with the not insane version of the belief.
And if he missed the mark on Chalmers a bit, like, I think it's fair, because I don't think he spent hours and hours, learning everything he could and discussing it with an expert, right?
Yeah.
I think he wanted just to engage with I think the first Zombies post started out with people say I don't engage with real philosophy enough. Well, here you go.
Mhm.
Here's like an easy case of where I think philosophy is missing the mark dramatically, and that's how we got here. So I don't think it was the result of a careful, long, deliberate conversation, but it was still a valuable contribution.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
He says a little in later on the post, like, could we define the word consciousness to mean whatever actually makes humans talk about consciousness? And I think we could, if we were sane. Yes, we could do that. He later says, if the word refers to anything at all, it refers to something that is, among other things, the cause of my talking about consciousness. Consciousness, among other things, makes you talk about consciousness. And that is just not true of Chalmers' representation of the world. Consciousness does not do anything. It certainly doesn't make you talk about consciousness. All it does is there is a feeling-ger entity out there that feels consciousness. So the whole post seems to talk past Chalmers, in my opinion.
Which is, again, fair.
Yeah.
As you stated, as you kind of laid out earlier, I think he's talking to a different version of Chalmers, and not one that I think he was deliberately mischaracterizing.
No, I mean, the whole thing, it kind of reminds me of like the Trinity or transubstantiation, right? Where, like, transubstantiation specifically, it's a thing where you're eating these crackers and this wine, and after they do the ritual on it, it becomes the body of Jesus and the blood of Jesus. And you ask, you look at them and you're like, this still looks like a cracker and this still looks like wine. And they're like, yes, the atoms are all the same. It is still wheat atoms in there. It is still grape atoms. Nothing has changed about the physical properties of anything you're touching. It's just that now it actually is the body of Jesus. And it's so ridiculous. I think it's made to be there on purpose to destroy logic and reason. Like, it's like, you shouldn't be introducing logic and reason into this religion. You either accept this contradiction and say, I am so dumb, I cannot understand God, or you reject the whole thing and become a reformed Catholic or whatever the hell, And that is what this sort of Zombies discourse sounds like to me.
You're missing the secret third path, which is where you just conclude that Jesus was made of wine and crackers.
Damn it, you're right.
But yeah, no, I think that's a fun analogy, and I think it works pretty well. Their whole thing is maybe the early church argued that we are actually changing the substance of this to something else. And even though they could all look at it and say it still looks like wine, anyone who said that was crucified, or whatever, hung. I guess they weren't crucifying. The Catholic Church, it wasn't crucifying people.
I can't possibly imagine that being true, because even the dumbest peasant can see that, a cracker's a cracker and it is not human flesh.
Right, but only the dumbest peasant would say that. Right?
Well,
the slightly less dumb peasants will notice that, but they'll be like, well, I don't want to get killed, so I'll go ahead and make the right noises to the church, right?
I think they would just be like, oh yeah, it's definitely Jesus's body in a spiritual sense. And believe it,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's magic.
Which, I mean, I realize that's a little unfair to the position, because Liam would say, no, it's not magic, it's physics we don't know of yet. But this is very much what it feels like to me, when it's saying it doesn't affect anything, not even talking about itself.
Well, I meant the transubstantiation thing.
Yeah.
Consciousness is, and I think, unfortunately, we kind of conflated a handful of things. I think we were mainly talking about just like qualia, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, in fact, I just got a notification from my doorbell that it noticed motion. Right?
Nice.
It's not conscious of it, but I was conscious of the notification.
Yeah, but that consciousness of that would not make you talk about it.
About
you noticing it.
It did, though.
No, it was the atoms processing things in your brain that made you talk about it. The consciousness is just the experiencing of it.
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah. That Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a nutty position, in my opinion, but what do I know?
I think that I honestly think there's less daylight between you and Liam than you guys both think. There's just like one nugget of special sauce missing that would make you guys both be like, "Oh yeah, of course," and sign on to that statement. Maybe we'll figure that out at some point in the future.
Okay. Well, since this post is titled "The Generalized Anti-Zombie Principle," we would like to know what that principle is. And he says the generalized anti-zombie principle says that if I do something to you that alters your consciousness, let alone makes you a completely different person, then you ought to notice somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's fine, and that's a good generalized anti-zombie principle. The fun kind of caveat about that second part of that sentence, that let alone makes you a completely different person, then you ought to notice. You know, if I wiped your memory and started you Eneasz from scratch, but with a different history,
Yeah.
that person would just wake up thinking that they've been that person the whole time. You actually would never notice.
Right.
But you might notice if your consciousness flickered off. That sounds fair. I've had that experience once. Well, I guess under psychedelic influence, I've had it in a different form. But one time I got like borderline blackout drunk.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
that
I was there for that time, right?
You were. That was when. Yeah, I tried to go clubbing, and this was years ago. I'm probably more equipped to try again, but or better equipped than I was before.
You hadn't even had that much to drink. It was some combination of setting and something.
So I remember I'd skipped dinner and I had modafinil, which I learned that day makes alcohol hit harder. Yeah. But yeah, I didn't have much dinner, and I had like 3 or 4 drinks, and they're heavy pours at that place. So, but yeah, it was a nice mixture of ingredients that led me to like suddenly realizing like, oh, I'm over in this part of the club now. And then at some point you found me and you asked if I was good, and I was like, oh, if I'm being checked on, I'm clearly need to go home. So I managed to get all the way home. I don't know if I was conscious of the whole trip there or not. So
okay, I don't think you necessarily need to go home if you're being checked on. Like if I'm going with friends to a club, there'll be sometimes periods of time where I don't see them for a half hour longer if they're off doing something, dancing with someone else. But I still like to check in on them every now and then, be like, hey, everything cool, you know?
Yeah, let me rephrase. I think my realization at the time was he has right to be checking in on me. And the reasons that I think he's concerned about are accurate, and I should go home.
Okay. You did seem out of it.
I was out of it. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't having a bad time, but I was not totally present.
Yeah. I will say that I think Liam would argue that, in fact, he would notice something if his consciousness was altered. It's just that nobody else in the universe could notice anything.
Well, I mean, and that's true if you get a little high or if you're tripping a little bit. You'll notice something differently, but you could keep it together enough in front of other people.
You could possibly hide it enough, yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, there's no way anyone could tell anything is different, even in principle. Right. You would ever know.
All right.
Kind of sucky. All right. There's 2 little things I pulled out at the end here, which are not related to the central thesis. But he says that whatever makes me talk about consciousness, it seems likely that the important parts take place on a much higher functional level than atomic nuclei. Someone who understood consciousness could abstract away from individual neurons firing and talk about high-level cognitive architectures, and still describe how my mind produces thoughts like, I think, therefore I am. He used this as a hypothetical that someone might say, this is basically what I think, which is why I think going down to new physical laws is the wrong direction to go. But this was a hypothetical statement, not a thing that he was putting forward as the actual truth.
Yeah, it's not going to be the kind of thing that's like, oh, because, the subatomic particles are moving this way. Because as he points out in the post, like those things are impacted on the micro scale all the time. He compares it just to the thermal noise of the room moving your atoms around. Like, if that's not screwing you up, then it's not screwing up your consciousness. Right. So it would need to be something above and beyond that. I think he's probably right.
What do you make of his mysterious concluding phrase here?
How far can you generalize the anti-zombie argument and have it still be valid? The makeup of future galactic civilizations may be determined by the answer. I suspect that he's getting at something along the lines of, he doesn't anticipate humans running on our current substrate in the future. Yeah. And so if the anti-zombie argument doesn't refute and he has like a dialogue of people arguing about whether or not being replaced, you're having your neurons replaced with transmitter or transistors would turn them off or change them or whatever. Mm-hmm. If it in fact would, we don't actually know, right? Yeah. It seems on its face totally plausible that I should be able to run on a different substrate, but maybe not. I think it's totally fair to say, you know what, I'm not really sure. Since we don't know what makes the experience happen exactly, we don't know how to replicate it yet, and it's not clear that switching out my brain meat for other stuff would actually do the same thing, right? So the future of galactic civilizations may be determined by the answer, because if it turns out that we believe incorrectly that we need to stay on the meat substrate, then that'll hinder our civilization going forward, right?
Yeah.
But also, if we're wrong in the other direction, that could this isn't, I think, the point he was making, but if we're wrong in the other direction, that could also fuck us, right?
Right. Then there would just be a bunch of machines pretending to be humans running around, but there's nobody home.
I can totally see that happening in a bad future. Whether or not that's a future running, or with people running around with circuits in their heads instead of neurons, or if it's just a future of LLMs talking to each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you? What's your take?
That was what I came to after thinking about it for a little bit.
Right on.
It would determine like what counts as an entity, and whether people are willing to turn themselves into cyborgs or other things, or if they're stuck in their meat suits, and what legal rights software entities might have. All those things.
I'm really curious. We're going to be hitting that threshold at any time now.
Yeah, we'll see it in our lifetime.
We'll see it in our lifetime in the not too distant future.
Yeah,
which hopefully won't be near the end of our lifetime.
Strong agree.
All right, let's move on to GASP versus GLUT. Those are two acronyms.
What do these acronyms stand for?
Well, Generalized Anti-Zombie Principle, and GLUT is Giant Lookup Table.
I felt that there isn't a lot here to talk about, because basically he talks about the hypothesis that you could create a device which would output the exact behavior of a human in every conceivable circumstance, so that's indistinguishable from a human. But it doesn't actually do any of the computations or information processing that we associate with conscious beings. It's just a giant lookup table where it takes an input, runs it through a lookup table, and then executes a specified output. To the point where, like, a giant lookup table of David Chalmers would live his life and write his book about zombies and all that, but there's never anything there doing any processing. It's just using the lookup table to output actions and words. And the question the post puts forward is this a conscious being? And the answer is no, obviously. And LCSR comes to the same conclusion.
I think it wouldn't be either. I loved his analogy or his example at the beginning. Like, you could make a lookup table for like multiplication. And so instead of like writing a function that multiplies two numbers, you instead pass in the function and it makes a database call, passing in the two numbers you gave it, and then returns the answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You imagine this impossibly, physically impossibly large lookup table and run a person on it. And like, yeah, okay, sure. In principle, quote unquote, that's imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that is, that's not a conscious person.
Yeah.
I think that we could all agree to that.
Yeah. And he quickly points out that whoever created the giant lookup table is the actual consciousness behind all this. Kind of like, if there's a zombie that isn't responsible for anything, but there's a zombie master controlling it, the consciousness is in the zombie master. And likewise, if the giant lookup table is controlling the zombie, then the consciousness is in the person who put together the giant lookup table.
With the caveat that, of course, you could have one or more levels of removal from the conscious entity.
Yes. He does eventually get down to like, oh, what if it was entirely by random? And then he's like, then obviously no, it just wouldn't be conscious. But then he interrogated how did you get a completely random lookup table that just happens to perfectly replicate a human like David Chalmers throughout their entire lifetime? That seems incredibly improbable. And then that brought us to what I thought was the really interesting part of the post, which was follow the improbability. I guess quickly we start that off with a story about Richard Feynman. When he was young, he played a game with his dad called Follow the Energy, where any expenditure of any energy anywhere on Earth could eventually be traced back to the sun, right? Like, why was his wind-up toy moving? Because he cranked up the spring. How did he get the energy to crank up the spring? He ate some food. Where did the food come from? Ultimately, it was plants that were powered by the sun. And you can get that for literally everything. Eliezer says, rationalists have a game called Follow the Improbability. Every improbable seeming belief needs an equivalent amount of evidence to justify it. Unless one had access to some kind of evidence for this belief, it would be highly improbable for a correct belief to form spontaneously. And the example he gave was Russell's teapot, that someone believes there just happens to be a teapot orbiting the rings of Saturn. I'm not sure if that was the exact example he gave, but it was something like that. And he says that in Follow the Improbability, it's highly suspicious to even talk about a specific hypothesis without having had enough evidence to narrow down the space of possible hypotheses. Why aren't you giving equal airtime to a decillion other equally plausible hypotheses? It's not realistic to suppose that you could spontaneously start discussing the true hypothesis by pure coincidence. And how that relates to zombies, I will leave as an exercise to the reader.
That's fair. It reminds me of a not that distant episode that we did about, why aren't you discussing these other decillion equally plausible hypotheses?
Yes, as to why, what was it? Why the universe exists or something?
Like, why are there lots of people or something?
Okay, yeah.
Whatever. Actually, many parts of that argument fell apart at that step.
Yeah.
Privileging one hypothesis over the other. But
yeah. It's a very common thing that people try to get away with when they're trying to hide, when they have a specific thing they want. And they're just kind of, at some point, they sneak in something which is extremely improbable.
Yeah. you gotta, at some point along your chain of reasoning, turn a small probability into a large one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can find where someone did that, you can be like, okay, no, you have broken the rule of having enough evidence to narrow down your probabilities.
Totes.
Alrighty, right near the end of the post. So this was written in 2008. He addresses why he's even talking about this. April 2008. He says, in this line of business, you meet an awful lot of people who think that an arbitrarily generated powerful AI will be moral. I kind of remember this. I don't think you get that anymore in 2024, do you?
I think there's still some popular proponent of that.
Okay.
It might be, I don't know if it's Scott Aronson or somebody else, but somebody is still pushing that point that I've heard in the last year, since the new popular AI conversations have been happening.
Okay. I not surprisingly agree with Eliezer when he says you can account for an AI that does improbably nice things by telling me how you chose the AI's design from a huge space of possibilities, but otherwise the improbability is being pulled out of nowhere. And that's worrisome for those of us who do not want to be killed by an AI.
Yeah. I'm watching a fun discussion that's it has a fun debate format with Eliezer and a podcaster named Dwarkesh Patel.
Yeah.
And their back and forth on this is a lot of fun. And Eliezer's basically having this at the part that I was most recently listening to, is basically having this part of the argument.
Oh, good.
And it's just what you're going to say, just because it's outputting the right actions, it doesn't mean you understand why it is, which means you can't count on it doing other actions. For that, this, you can't put your brain in its head, right? So it's fun to watch these conversations.
Yeah,
and it's kind of fun that he's been having them for almost 20 years.
Yeah,
I know this was 2008, but he mentions in the podcast he's been doing this since the early 2000s. But
well,
anywho.
what are we reading next time?
Next time we've got Belief in the Implied Invisible and Quantum Explanations.
Excellent. Looking forward to that.
Totally. All right, so for the Thank a Supporter segment of the episode, we are actually at the end of our list of patrons. We have Substack supporters that we haven't contacted yet to ask what name they want us to use, because Substack has, a bit more of the privacy aspect of that crowd is a bit higher. So anyway, no individual shout out. This one goes out to everybody. Thank you for listening, and thank you to everyone who supports us, however you have and however you're able to. We deeply appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all very much, and we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Sounds great.
Okay, bye.
See ya.